Chapter 904. Now, the final part of fate had arrived. The moment Pubris lost his divine power, Huaishur felt an almost tangible killing intent. It came from Pubris, no, it came from the gods. When the heavens released their killing intent, the stars shifted. At this moment, the darkness of the universe seemed to be pressing down on Huaishur along with the stars. An invisible and intangible power descended from the heavens, heavily pressing down on his soul. It almost caused his consciousness to collapse. In Pubris' palm, the turbulent vortex of fire burned more and more fiercely, aiming at Huaishur. An endless stream of light surrounded it, making death look exquisite and gorgeous. "You are indeed the variable that Hades said, Huaishur." The god sitting high up in the sky looked down at the ant beneath his feet. "Therefore, I will do my best to eliminate you completely." On the cracked earth, Huaishur did his best to gasp for breath. He held dead water tightly, preventing himself from being crushed by that terrifying pressure. But he couldn't even stand up. He was about to be pressed into the ground by that seemingly tangible pressure. He couldn't resist at all. He could only feel the endless threat of death rising in his heart. He was drenched in sweat. When that crimson vortex the size of a ping-pong ball was aimed at him, he felt powerless and trembling from the bottom of his heart. He couldn't control himself. That level of firepower was enough to compare with the giant thunderstorm disaster that enveloped the entire city. Even if he used all his strength to defend himself, wouldn't he be vaporized in an instant upon contact? But he didn't feel afraid. "Do you know, Pubris?" At that moment, Huaishur tried his best to raise his head and look at the figure above him. Suddenly, he laughed disdainfully. "Even if I have to carry the village of dusk and hold the eternal frost furnace with one hand, I, Huaishur, am still invincible against Helios." In a short silence, Pubris was stunned in the air, unable to understand. He felt a burst of ridicule from the bottom of his heart. He felt ridiculous for going all out against such trash as an opponent. This was the king of Doomsday. This was the executioner that the Astronomical Society was most proud of. Was this the catalyst that Mikhail loved so much? Was this the culprit who messed up his divine creation mystic instrument? This is simply baffling. He clenched his fists coldly. "What the hell are you trying to say?" In that instant, as the 5 fingers closed together, an indescribable fury caused the firestorm to instantly shatter and expand. Accompanied by the fury of the gods, the firestorm transformed into a scorching red that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, falling towards the earth and enveloping everything. Destruction fell from the sky. It lit up Huaishur's eyes. At that moment, Huaishur took a deep breath and made the most correct decision since he set foot on Helios. He roared with all his might. He called out to the distance, "Skeleton, save me!" Then, an incomparably reassuring voice sounded in his ears. In the boiling water tank, the silent Radiant King raised his new pair of eyes. "Okay, go," he said. "I'm here to save you." Thus, the Radiant King, Baldur, descended. Immediately after, Huaishur was engulfed by the scorching red flames of the storm. The mighty pillar of fire almost pierced through Helios from top to bottom, leaving a straight trace that could be observed even far away in the present realm. And Huaishur was unscathed. Floating in the air, he looked at the thin layer of light covering his body in shock. The flowing light covered his body like a bubble. It made all disasters unable to hurt him. And above his head, a phantom that swayed like a lamp appeared. It was a cartoon version of a skull with long golden mohawk hair. It felt like a hooligan character in a MOBA game. "What is this? Why is it so awesome?" Huaishur looked at the light membrane around his body excitedly. He felt that he had entered an invincible state and felt unprecedentedly at ease. "It's really amazing. This is the blessing that my mother, my real mother, left for me." Speaking of this, the cartoon version of the skull's face had a complicated expression. Don't rely too much on it. Otherwise, you might encounter disasters in unexpected places. Soon, Huaishur found a never-before-seen annotation in the status column on the title page of the Book of Destiny. It was written in hot golden runes. All things are harmless. All things in the world make a promise to the sun that they will never harm you, except for mistletoe and creations born after 192 AD. Fleischer was dumbfounded. Amazing. Let's not talk about mistletoe for now. Why are things born after 192 AD excluded? No matter how strong Viking kung fu is, it can't be compared to a foreign gun. The tone of the skull became more and more complicated, probably because I was already dead after that. Fleischer was speechless. In the sky, the murderous intent from Publius became more and more ferocious. Balder, so that's how it is? He murmured in understanding. His eyes were full of murderous intent on his cracked face. When the authority of the sun god was split into two, Helios welcomed two completely different sun gods. The incomplete Publius and the incomplete Balder. It was like a cream cake being cut from the middle with a knife. The left side became a fruit sandwich, while the right side became a black chocolate cake. They were completely different opposites. Even if they didn't understand what had happened, the moment they sensed each other, they would understand that they were cut from the same cloth, as well as the reality that fire and water were incompatible. The complete divine state that originally belonged to Publius, the divine throne of the sun god, had been forcibly split apart by Garland. In the end, what was left were two incomplete fragments. One was an incomplete soul, and the other was an incomplete god. One only got back the divine soul, and the other only got back the divine body. Both were half-finished products. What a pitiful, silly child. In the temple, Tangi looked down sympathetically. Look at that expression. It's like he finally got the acceptance letter from Dongsha University after painstaking efforts, only to have the letter snatched back by the postman. Sorry, it was sent to the wrong person. You weren't the one who got in. It was next door. At this moment, Publius was no longer the sun god. He couldn't even be considered a true god. Without the divine soul, there was no possibility of him wielding authority on behalf of the mandate of heaven. It was like a mortal civil servant who suddenly lost his authority and became a contract worker. He could no longer be called a god. At best, he was just a titan who had been tricked by Olympus to work for free. Now that you mention it, I suddenly remember. Tangi suddenly turned around and looked at Zeus. What was the name of the driver you assigned to Helios? The one who died especially miserably. I have a pretty deep impression of him. I think he was called. She thought for a moment and suddenly laughed. Hyperion? At that moment, Publius raised his hand and covered his cracked face. He felt a deep pain from his soul. It was a humiliation and mockery from fate. No matter how many sacrifices he made, he was not destined to be immortal. In the end, he was just dust. Dust. You damned, resurrected corpses. He gritted his teeth, and his scarlet eyes appeared between his fingers. Is it because I haven't paid a high enough price? Is it because you want to stop me? Enough. Enough. He had had enough of all this. It was time to end it. The enemy was the reborn Balder, the deceased soul of a god, the former king of light. Since that was the case, he would mobilize Demeter's domain and combine it with the miracle of the goddess of spring. The basic material would be the Narcissus curse. Then, using it as the source, he would trace it back, and trace it back again. Then, an infinite amount of green gathered and turned into a long and sharp blade. In the blink of an eye, Publius had completed the reconstruction of the god-slaying spear. Mistletoe, as a grandmaster, it was easy for him to deliberately attack the enemy's weakness. Moreover, after obtaining the body of a god, it was only a few years. At this moment, Publius was undoubtedly the strongest grandmaster in history. He was even closer to the essence of this than Rodan, who was once praised as being close to a god. Die. In an instant, the mistletoe blade whistled through the air. It was so fast that Fleischer could not react in time. He could only follow his premonition of death and instinctively turn his head. Then, he felt a terrifying wind pressure brush past his shoulder. The spear, which was powerful enough to kill a god, brushed past his arm, pierced through Helios, and pierced into the demon's eye in the distant Jupiter. It was swallowed up by the eternal storm and quickly spread, turning into a green spot that could not be removed. It could be seen even from space. As for Huaishur, she could no longer feel her right arm. It was just a small scratch. There was no blood, and he did not suffer any injuries. Horror rose in his heart. Huaishur could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. He looked up at the skeleton and urged, "Hurry up and get rid of him. This guy is the one who usurped your position as a god. After killing him, you will be the great sun, and I will be the second son. Even a lousy dog can become a great general. Isn't that perfect? The problem is, I can't deal with him." Baldur's skeleton showed a bitter smile. "The blessing of invulnerability is a gift from Mother. I don't need to use my power. But other than that, I have no power to use Ago. Don't call me Ago at a time like this." Huaishur was so angry that he was about to cry. "How come all of you only have sound and visual effects? The results are not reliable at all. Were you sent by the special effects team to torture me?" But there was no other way. Only Baldur's soul had been resurrected. It did not have divine power or authority. Moreover, none of Baldur's authority was destructive. He was ashamed to say that as the only healer of the Asur race, he did not have a single damage output skill. In the past, when his divine body was still present, he had wielded his battle axe and fought on the front lines with his father and brothers. However, each member of his family was better at fighting than the other. There was no need for him to ignite his Viking soul. He could just stand by and watch. Then what should we do? Huaishur was dumbfounded. The exchange of origin substances between the two sides only took an instant. But in the sky, countless star-like green lights had already appeared around Publius. It was just a simple copy and paste. For a Grandmaster, it was easy to recreate the results. In the end, it formed countless mistletoe spears. "We can only rely on you now," Baldur said helplessly. "I still have a way, but the pressure on you is a bit. Don't worry about the method. If you can use it, use it." Huaishur was about to die of anxiety. "What pressure are you afraid of at a time like this? Do you think I can withstand pressure?" The level 10 account was obtained for free. "You said it yourself. Why do I feel like I've heard this before?" Huaishur scratched his head. Suddenly, a familiar feeling of being tricked surfaced in his mind. However, it was already too late. In that instant, Baldur's skull lowered, and his divine soul merged with Huaishur's body. With his innate divine authority and will that could illuminate the earth and ignite all darkness, he entered Huaishur's body and controlled the miracle of Great Seeming. Then, following the veins of the sacred mark, he came to Huaishur's soul and will. They connected into one. Baldur took the initiative to retract all of his will and emotions and used all of his authority to share this noble soul that originated from the gods with Huaishur. At that moment, Huaishur turned into light. Chapter 905. That was not an empty description, but a literal meaning. The moment Baldur shared his soul, Huaishur's body emitted an indescribable wail. The divine mark trembled, and his soul collapsed. It was difficult to maintain oneself. When this will from the gods descended, mortals were as insignificant as grass. A human body could not bear the will of a god. Even if Huaishur's body was endowed with divinity, it was difficult for the King of Light's divine soul to operate. In an instant, it began to rapidly become transparent, emitting a pure and dazzling light. It was almost about to dissolve. His consciousness seemed to have merged with the light, breaking through the shackles and restrictions of his body and spreading in all directions. At the speed of light, it galloped, spread, and enveloped everything. However, he could not react at all. All things were constantly being stuffed into his soul. His consciousness could not bear it at all. He could only passively act as the hub and pour this huge amount of information into the Book of Destiny. This caused the thickness of the Book of Destiny to increase rapidly, recording these meaningless observations in milliseconds. Soon, the Book of Destiny reacted with his soul and began to clean up this redundant data. After digesting it in an instant, it finally enveloped Huaishur's soul, maintaining his consciousness. This wave was a CPU overload that almost exploded the motherboard. In this intense pain, Huaishur's mind began to wander again. "Focus, doggy. Baldur's nervous voice sounded in Huaishi's consciousness. Don't let your imagination run wild. Focus and find a place that resonates with you. Resonance? What resonance? The moment this thought appeared, the Book of Destiny actually began to operate on its own. Then, Huaishi felt that he had really become a ray of light. A ray of divine light that pierced through the reality and hell. In this vacuum of the universe, far away from the only entrance to hell, Huaishi actually bypassed the monopoly of the three major blockades and entered deep diving. He began to fall. In the blink of an eye, countless streaks of light flew past his eyes. With the support of his divine soul, his consciousness went straight down to a depth he had never imagined. The deep zone, the withered zone, crossed the boundaries of the quiet zone and flew into the depths of the dark zone. He sank straight into the darkness. Countless strange sights that seemed familiar or had never been seen before flew past his eyes. He saw the turbulent waves on the endless sea, the raging flames burning in hell in the Middle East. He saw Leviathan in the sea staring coldly at the Lord of the Flames sky in another hell, and the hostility between the rulers collided. He also saw the lights on the lighthouses outside Whitetown. Countless lighthouses around the realm were being lit up by the Astronomy Club. Then, he saw hell's depths gradually rising. In the lonely darkness, the eyes of the withered king drooped as he sat on his throne, as if he was deep in thought. The dragon of decay spread its wings and swept across countless hells. On the Titan Sea, where lightning surged, the king of dwarfs blew the horn. Thousands of warships pulled their anchors, and the mighty drums sounded together with the thunder. In the blessed land, in the supreme temple, the hunchbacked messenger knelt respectfully, kowtowing to the god of hell and letting the invisible mouth swallow him up. War. It seemed that the war that covered everything was coming. Everywhere was grinding teeth and sucking blood, and it couldn't wait. In the countless crisscrossing images, his heart moved, and he seemed to see a strange maze that was so complicated and huge that it was incomprehensible, and a ferocious shadow was slowly rising from it. Thousands of tentacles curled up, roaring hungrily in the sea of blood and mountains of corpses. Then it was casually blown up by an old man full of muscles. It was like taking a stroll after a meal. Sensing that someone was spying on him from afar, he looked back unhappily. It was as if he could see Huaishi in the light. He frowned, but soon he waved his hand nonchalantly and gestured a cheering gesture. Then he turned around and walked deeper into the maze. He disappeared. When Huaishi came back to his senses, he had already arrived at the unknown hell. When he lifted his head again, he saw the slender figure sleeping in the dust. He froze on the spot. Before that, a pair of pitch-black eyes had already looked up, and a murderous intent as sharp as iron was pressed against his throat, heart, back, limbs, and even every vital part of his body. The murderous intent and curses were forged into metal in the furnace, killing everything. But when he sensed the identity of the intruder, the metal disappeared along with the murderous intent. It turned into indescribable confusion and blankness. "This is Sunmaker?" Huaishi subconsciously raised his right hand, showing the casting furnace that had already fused with his soul. A long echo burst out between the only two casting furnaces in the world. Baldur's soul had actually brought his soul to this place, but the burden brought by the deep dive was too great, and he had no time to think about the key points. In a short time, Huaishi blurted out, "Can you do me a favor?" Without waiting for him to continue speaking, his soul was pulled by an invisible force, and it involuntarily began to rise rapidly. It quickly returned to his body. However, in the blink of an eye, it was as if nothing had happened, but this still couldn't change what happened next. Above the vault of heaven, a murderous intent that was enough to kill gods descended from the sky. Countless mistletoe spears turned into dark green stars that filled the sky, covering the pitch-black background of the universe. Now, the stars had locked onto Huaishi's existence, and like a torrential rain, they came whistling over. Huaishi's vision turned black. It's over. But then, Balder let out a cry of joy. It's connected. At that moment, the 10,000 trillion hellish optical fibers formed by the soul of the King of Light connected again, creating a straight path between hell and the present realm. It also allowed the authority from the deepest part of hell to be displayed at the speed of light in the present. A mighty bell chime burst forth from afar. The silent twilight village began to stir. The foundation of all eras, created by the forgers of old, received the Paragon's command once more. Then it began to change beyond the expectations of the Paragon. It was as if Huaishir's account had been taken over in an instant. It took her less than an instant to get used to this somewhat cramped and cumbersome body. Then, it took her another instant to understand what had happened. Finally, it took her another instant to come up with a solution to the problem, and it was implemented. Then, the huge steel city burst forth with a loud noise. Countless gears rotated rapidly, and the armor fell off. After the cumbersome structure was thrown away, a brand new change that even a grandmaster could not master emerged. Countless huge facilities rose and fell like piano keys, and after a gap of several eras and tens of millions of years, they once again played a song of praise. In a trance, Huaishir felt as if he was standing on the concert platform, facing the symphony orchestra in front of him, and he couldn't help but raise the baton in his hand. The moment he waved it, hundreds of millions of complex instructions flowed out of the forge, covering every step and every link. When all of this overlapped, it became the simplest of edicts and secret words, conveying his will to the Twilight Village, activating the instructions hidden at the bottom. Tell it. The Supreme One returns. Then, a loud collapse sounded from every corner. All burdens were thrown away, and all excess was put down, returning to the most original appearance and the most basic structure. When the stars had yet to fall, the village of dusk had already collapsed into nothingness. The eternal frost furnace broke apart from the center, shedding off its cumbersome form. Only countless rolling iron lights rose like waves and surrounded Huaishir from all directions. Then, the mistletoe storm of stars fell from the sky. It was as if countless giant green trees were uprooted from the ground of Helios in an instant. It was a cloud of fire formed when the mistletoe spear exploded. But right after that, the surging flames were cleanly cut apart from the middle, because there was a cold iron light rising from it. A pair of steel wings made of countless crow feathers slowly unfurled, as if they were going to envelop the entire world within them. The forging flames shrouded it. The casting from hell was still going on, with the main body of the Twilight Village and the skeleton of the Sky Fortress as the foundation. It was attached to Huaishir's body and rebuilt, finally forming a solemn armor more than 2 meters tall. Biological reconstruction, nirvana transformation, balance scale, heavenly creation, negative balance, overload resonance, chaos star chain, ashen sublimation, 3 phases conversion, and finally, all origins return to one. After gathering the unique skills of the 13 kings of forging, what was formed was the scepter that commanded the Twilight Village. Huaishir had only seen the supreme authority once on the Sunmaker. Perpetual motion armor, gear, emperor. However, this was completely different from the Sunmaker's own authority. There was no eternal power of the furnace of eternal frost. Instead, Huaishir's forging furnace was the core, and the Skypalace's physical body and Osiris's soul were used to recreate it. But at the same time, it also had absolute control over the Twilight Village. Now, Huaishir was equivalent to wearing the entire Twilight Village. When he felt the surging power continuously bursting out of the furnace, he spontaneously understood. Now, as the ruler of the Twilight Village, he had the same power as the Sunmaker. This was the authority lent by the Sunmaker. At this moment, when he raised his eyes again and looked at Publius, who was at the same level as him, various data and icons continuously appeared on the screen in front of him. Hostile signal detected. Lens detection complete. Enemy identified. Unknown god. Incomplete. Divinity of the Sun domain detected. Nether River mode activated. Phase transfer armor installed. Supreme Judgment Blade. Horus reconstruction begins. The artificial intelligence hub from Lord of the Flies came online again. Countless data changed, appeared, and disappeared, and finally turned into an extremely simple UI interface. And a blessing from Beelzebub, frowny face, happy war. Your Excellency Judge. At that moment, the silent eyes on the Gear Emperor's steel face lit up with a solemn radiance. His steel wings unfolded, spewing out dazzling streams of flames. The armor that was reborn from hell soared in the vacuum of the universe. The burning blade in his hand instantly pierced through 16 layers of defense and was very close to him. When the blade slashed down, a terrible crack appeared in Publius' chest. He was sent flying. In the blink of an eye, his opponent, who was originally at the mercy of others, had shed his disguise and turned into a monster beloved by hell, a ruler who was close to God. Publius' expression twitched, full of confusion and confusion. There was also unconcealable confusion. Behind him, an alchemy array spread in the void and recreated the divine mark, wrath of the sun. However, the coronal matter within the solar storm, which was strong enough to incinerate a mortal, was cleanly sliced apart by the sword and quickly dissipated into origin substance. No matter how hard he searched his memory, he could not equate the information in his memory with the strange thing in front of him. He also could not understand why the King of Light would suddenly become like this, even as God's body had been injured by the other party. There were too many unknowns, too many changes, and too many illogical things that he could not understand at all. He even felt fear. He widened his eyes and asked hoarsely, "What are you? You're actually not going to start with your name?" A mocking voice came from under the hell armor. "You should know my identity very well, Publius. I'm Huaishur of the celestial genealogy. Choose one of the many titles you like. If you really can't understand the situation, then I can explain it in a way that you can understand." In that instant, the layers of coronal projections were torn apart in front of the charging armor. "I am the Sunmaker." A hoarse voice sounded in Publius' ears. The light of judgment burned fiercely on the blade, illuminating his eyes. "I am Gear Emperor Osiris." Chapter 906. The power of the Gear Emperor and Hyperion collided, causing another crack to appear on Pubris' face. Then, as Pubris roared, an ancient shield appeared out of thin air in front of him. It then turned into the shadow of a city wall, mercilessly counterattacking Huaishur's power several times over. Miracle Mark, Aegis of Ajax. After casually creating an indestructible defense, Pubris waved his hand again and chanted, "For the sake of these 10, I will not destroy that city." Thus, the earth's crust flipped over, and a huge city appeared out of thin air from iron, earth, and stone. It actually surrounded Huaishur from all directions, firmly sealing him within. Countless sins turned into tangible shackles that did not allow him to break free. Immediately after, salt powder appeared out of thin air like a blizzard, and then great stars of sulfur and fire fell from the sky, completely covering Huaishur Tong and the city full of sin. Destructive flames spread out like a tide, and sharp pillars of salt grew out of the ground like a forest. Mark of the miracle, fall of Sodom. Then the incomplete sun wheel flashed behind Pubris, and countless flaming radiances whistled as they fell to the ground. The arrows condensed from the plasma cloud extracted from the revolution of the star fell one after another. Each of them lit up the land with rising and falling sparks. When the high temperature dissipated, it was replaced by the plague and vicious poison of the gods. Miracle Mark, reign of Apollo. It was as if it still felt that it was not enough. Pubris raised his hand without hesitation and pointed to the sky. The secret technique from the Grandmaster was operating at full power, and with his own divine body as the core, a natural disaster once again descended at an astonishing speed. Where that hand pointed, the darkness of the universe was actually torn apart, as if a huge hole had opened in the sky. An endless stream of water from the river Styx turned into a torrent gushing out. The river of the dead, which took away all souls, wreaked havoc above Helios, but quickly turned into a phantom and dissipated. Before that, countless lightning bolts intertwined to form a thunderstorm once again enveloped everything. This was the destructive power of a great grandmaster with the body of a deity. In the past, the god's miracle engraving, which required the use of complicated secret instruments and countless prerequisites, was cast out without any pressure. In just half a minute, the seventh god's miracle engraving had already descended from the sky. However, it was all to no avail. After a mountain of blades, a sea of flames, thunder, and lightning flashed, Huaishur remained unscathed on the ground. In front of him, the thick steel barrier that kept regenerating suddenly disappeared. To be precise, it turned into scorching steel steam, and then quickly shrank and solidified. Countless components were formed out of thin air and riveted together. Finally, the heavy cannon was pointed at the sky. This was the three-phases conversion that allowed the items to freely transform between liquid, solid, and gaseous states, as well as the heavenly works of creation that allowed all creations to operate perfectly without any loopholes. The combination of the two king of casting's consummate skills resulted in this jaw-dropping scene. While the ruler limited time experience card given by the Sunmaker was in effect, Huaishur could freely use the consummate skills of the 13 king of casting's consummate skills. There was no need to learn or adapt. It was as if he was born with it. In the blink of an eye, Osiris's phase shield was reforged into the Styx's main cannon. Then, there was the negative balance, which could infinitely increase the upper limit of the load, and the overload resonance, which could multiply the power through overloading. Using the Chaos Star Chain to lock onto the enemy's position, it gave the effect of a sure hit. With a snap of Huaishur's fingers, the blade of Horus in the cannon's bore turned into a blazing flash of light, tearing through the deep darkness of the universe. After piercing through the layers of defense, it left a deep gap in the god's miracle engraving of Ajax's shield. It pierced through Publius's chest. The perfect body of a deity was once again covered with a tragic wound. Stop it, Apu. Everyone outside is a natural enemy. Huaishur stretched out his hand, and the outline of the Styx's main cannon melted again, transforming into the reborn blade of Horus. Flames burst out from the blade, locking onto the opponent's face from a distance. So, how about we make a deal? He said. As a second-class military officer of the Astronomy Society, I promise you that if you surrender now, I will fight for leniency for you. How about that? You should know that you have no chance of winning. In fact, when Huaishur was on the same level as him, he had already lost. In other words, when Huaishur had the means to harm him, Publius was already destined to lose. From a war between a deity and a mortal, it became a war between half-finished products and half-finished products, a war between a forger and an alchemist, no matter how the external appearance changed. According to Beelzebub's calculations, even after losing the complete deity position, the difference in strength between Publius and Huaishur was still huge. It had just changed from 10 o'clock to 7-3. The winning rate had become 9-1. Unfortunately, that 9 was Huaishur. It was the same even if the opponent was a grandmaster. If bullying the weak was the privilege of a grandmaster, then defeating the strong with the weak was Huaishur's specialty. If the double red rod of the Astronomy Society couldn't even defeat an old man, he might as well retire early, get married, and raise children. Why do you have to show mercy, Huaishur? That's really unnecessary. Publius sneered and looked down at his face. I've already been in the cage of life for too long. I don't need the Astronomy Society to go through the trouble of building high walls for me. Prison? He had been in it for a long time. From the moment he was born, from the moment he learned his first sentence. What he felt was not joy or novelty, but a constant suffocation. 3 months into the pregnancy, he was diagnosed with an ectopic pregnancy. 5 months into the pregnancy, he was attacked. 6 months into the pregnancy, he was diagnosed with a developmental deformity and a lack of organs. During this time, he was on the verge of having a miscarriage several times. He also had to undergo 2 secret correction procedures and 1 operation. Even his mother suffered from massive bleeding during childbirth and almost died. This man, who was now called Publius, was born with a life full of misfortune. The moment he opened his eyes for the first time, everyone felt happy for the successful birth of this premature child who had almost died several times. However, what he comprehended was not joy for life. Instead, it was fear of death. It was fear that was engraved in his soul. He could not deceive himself by telling himself that time was long, because the end of eternity was constantly approaching, constantly reminding him that life was as short as dew. No matter how many principles he learned, no matter what skills he mastered, the despair of death grew with each passing day. It could not be reduced. Even in Helios, who was full of miracles, he could not obtain the slightest bit of comfort. Instead, he became more and more depressed and tortured. What followed was anger. Even the countless commandments and laws, even the imprisonment of the Astronomy Society, could not extinguish this anger. This anger toward life. What followed was the desire for immortality. From the moment he awakened this thought, Publius swore that he would not stop, even if the whole world was blocking his way. He wanted to leave this prison called life. Why bother? Huaishur sighed and scratched his head through the helmet. Who isn't like this? Then do I have to die like this? Just because you're all the same? Why? Publius laughed hoarsely. I just want to go to the world outside the cage. Do you have to stop me? Hey, Publius, Huaishur asked indifferently. I won't talk about what you've done in the past, but you should be clear about the consequences of your actions, right? You didn't hesitate to kill those in the present in exchange for your own survival. What kind of logic is there in doing such a thing? Killing something in exchange for your own survival? Isn't that what a human is? Why, sure, I'm just doing the same thing as you in the Astronomy Society. A strange and mocking expression appeared on Publius' cracked face. No matter what you say, why, sure, I've already escaped from that cage. I won't turn back. No one can stop me, why, sure. His eyes were burning with scarlet flames as he roared hoarsely. Not even a god. How strange, Publius. After a brief silence, Huaishur couldn't help but shake his head and sigh helplessly. You clearly desire immortality, but why? At that moment, he raised his eyes, which were filled with killing intent. Are you seeking your own death? Intense light burst forth. In his hand, the sword of Horus trembled violently. Countless modules expanded and grew out of thin air, freeing itself from the shackles of iron. A torrent of light that was hundreds of meters long was formed. The Gear Emperor Osiris was overloaded. The Nether River mode was activated. With the support of the divine soul of the Radiant King, the sword of judgment descended from the sky, breaking through the waves that emerged from the void. The Gear Emperor spread his wings of steel and soared above the sun chariot with the acceleration of hundreds of vectors. Once again, he slashed down at the incomplete god. Publius laughed loudly. There was no longer any hesitation or fear. Long and complicated incantations and chants were compressed into a single moment, turning into a sharp and ear-piercing sound. Miracles descended once again. Under his control, they began to self-multiply once more. Copy, transcribe, form again. When Publius unclenched his fist, countless flames appeared out of nowhere in the air behind him. Shrouded by layers of runes and arrays, the miniature suns created by the gods rapidly split apart. Following Publius' instructions, they flew forward. Immediately after, they were quickly destroyed by the sword of intense light. It was like a bubble. Only terrifying shockwaves and streams of flames gushed out from within, leaving behind pitch-black burn marks on the ferocious armor. The solemn warrior spread his wings of iron and steel. Holding the sword of intense light in his hand, he charged forward like a hot knife through butter. He cut through all obstacles in front of him and challenged the laughing enemy. It was like a scene from a myth replaying itself. The cruel battle between the hero and the evil dragon descended once more. Helios, who was riddled with holes, wailed. Cracks kept appearing on his body, but the flames burning on his body became more and more intense. The battle between the sun god and the sun god had evolved to its climax. Chapter 907. When the divine mark that had turned into an iron wall was smashed by the Gear Emperor, death came right at his face. In an instant, the sword of judgment pierced Pubris' chest and swept across, tearing apart his heart and left arm. His precious divine shell was torn apart, and his arm flew into the air. But right after that, Pubris' remaining right hand gripped his arm tightly. With his own blood, he cursed the sword of judgment. The flames were extinguished. The left arm that had fallen off rapidly changed and reformed into a bloody arrow full of curses. It tore apart Huaishur armor and pierced through his body, causing a large part of his body to rapidly weaken, crystallize, and crack. Pubris laughed loudly as he retreated. However, the hand that he had grabbed turned around and grabbed his wrist tightly. When he looked up in shock, he realized that they were already very close to each other. Huaishur grinned under the broken helmet. "What is this? Delivering food to the door?" The thunder of supreme tear burst forth. With one punch, half of Pubris' head was smashed, causing his face to be completely mutilated. But when Huaishur clenched his fist again, he realized that the arm he was holding was also broken. Like a gecko losing its tail, Pubris took the initiative to tear off his remaining right hand and fell from the air. He rapidly increased his speed, tried to distance himself, but it was useless. In Huaishur's hand, the outline of the axe of wrath appeared. The iron wings on his back spewed out hot currents as he swooped down. But before that, Baldur's anxious reminder rang in his consciousness. "Wait," he said nervously. "Don't use other weapons called Adam." Adam. Huaishur was stunned for a moment. The axe of wrath in his hand disappeared without a trace, replaced by Bichimos, who had turned back into steel. The hammer of agony. But now, as Huaishur swooped down, Baldur's divine soul actually operated on the hammer of agony, bringing about the supreme blessing from the Norse gods. It caused the ferocious wolf's head to transform once more. Along with the circulation of divinity, it became even more ferocious, and a violent aura gushed out from within, causing the entire world to be dyed in the color of blood. With Baldur's support, it was no longer a pure origin equipment. It couldn't even be called a border relic. Instead, it was a terrifying existence that resonated with some kind of fallen authority. This was the difference between them and freaks like Baldur. The attitude that truly belonged to the Nordic gods was definitely not gentle, but cruel and cold, just like the cold wind and frost that swallowed up the world. At this moment, the animated bestial soul was roaring, causing the hammerhead to light up with a halo that represented extinction. End all light and create eternal darkness. This was an eternal greed that would devour everything in the world, even the sun. Soul metamorphosis. Fenrir. You're really persistent. In midair, a resolute look appeared in Publilius' single, incomplete eye. His broken arms spread open, and he recklessly activated his divine body, causing the projection of the sun to appear once more. The alchemy array appeared out of thin air once more. After pouring in almost all of his power, Publilius' body spewed out an endless stream of dazzling flames. This was a terrifying change that surpassed the limits of human imagination. It caused Helios to instantly burn red, and a violent light flew in all directions, igniting everything. He had truly turned himself into the sun. But darkness descended from the sky. The Gear Emperor sped up again, throwing itself straight into the endless heat, allowing it to burn its armor until it was scarlet red. Amidst the burning pain, he used up all of his origin equipment and raised the hammer that had turned into the end. With just one blow, I will use the pain of the human world to strike down the gods. Huaishur roared hoarsely. Your eternity should end now, Publilius. In that instant, the burning sun exploded with a loud bang. With the blessing of Baldur's divine soul, Fenrir's power penetrated the high temperature comparable to that of a star. Together with Huaishur, it brazenly shattered the core within. It was an incomplete sun wheel. As the sun collapsed, the terrifyingly high temperature turned into a torrent, flying in all directions along with the fragments. The entire dark universe seemed to have been illuminated, but immediately after, everything disappeared without a trace. As Fenrir opened his mouth, all of the light disappeared into that bottomless mouth. Even his sun was completely swallowed up. Only a rapidly shattering body was left. With Hwaishur's trampling, it fell from the sky and smashed into the scorching earth. Feeling the power of the gods continuously flowing out of his body, Publilius tried his best to widen his eyes, but his shattered pupils could not see anything else. He could only see the ferocious black shadow that was close at hand, and the blood-stained hammer that was raised in his hand again. "Do you still want to say something, Publilius?" Hwaishur asked hoarsely. Publilius opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but hesitated. In the end, it turned into a self-mocking sneer. He closed his eyes, and under Fenrir's bombardment, he was completely reduced to dust. Soon, the blessing from Baldur also slowly dissipated. Geir Emperor quickly collapsed, leaving only the complete Lord of the Flies among the fragments on the ground. "Brother, your ruler experience card has expired." Beelzebub sighed regretfully. "Why don't we go find the Sunmaker to renew it? If you sacrifice a little and sell your body, we can still happily drive Gundams." "Happily my ass." Hwaishur smiled bitterly. "I keep feeling that nothing good ever happens when I turn on my armor." He gasped for breath with difficulty, but his body that was on the verge of breaking down could no longer stay awake. He opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but the drowsiness had already pulled him, dragging his soul into a long dream. He only remembered that before he fell, someone had supported him and carefully placed him on the ground. "Thank you for your hard work," a gentle voice said to him. The gentle male voice said to him, "Leave the rest to me." Thus, Hwaishur closed his eyes in peace. He fell into a deep sleep. On the other side of Helios, under the same dark sky, under the broken bone tower in the ruins, Hades slowly retracted his hand. He fell into silence. In front of him, the reconstructed body crumbled once again. Death followed him like a shadow, unable to be shaken off. "Give up. I'm hopeless," Pubis said calmly. "I've split too much. I've already exceeded my limit. I was killed by the gods. It seems that I can no longer maintain the structure of my consciousness." In the silence, Hades didn't speak. He just leaned against the wall and sighed silently. As for Pubis, he couldn't help but laugh when he saw how tired he looked. "Is there anything to be happy about?" Hades asked coldly. "No. Actually, I just want to be happy. After all, it'll be too late if I'm not happy," Pubis said. "Garland, that guy always says enjoy while you can, right?" "Sorry, Hades," Pubis said. "I'm still a little short." "Idiot. Why didn't you run away?" Hades asked coldly. "You should have known from the beginning that even if you became a god, you wouldn't have a chance of success against the Astronomical Association, right? Why didn't you just take the results and leave this place?" "What nonsense are you talking about, Hades?" Pubis shook his head and looked up at the empty universe. He said softly, "Immortality is already so close. How could I turn around and leave?" He had been chasing after it for too long. He had been longing for it for too long. It actually made him feel that as long as he could succeed, nothing else mattered. Even if there was no immortality ahead of him, only death awaited him. How laughable. Those who are chasing after immortality and eternity have become short-lived and insignificant because of this. But for some reason, I feel very happy. Publilius stared at the starry sky in a daze and suddenly asked, "Hades, our wish has come true, hasn't it? Even if it was only for a moment, our wish has come true, hasn't it?" Hades looked away and nodded slowly. "Yes." Then Publius's countenance relaxed. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." Hades shook his head. "This is what I should do." Pubis stared blankly for a moment. He couldn't help but laugh. He laughed loudly. "Idiot. Are there people in this world who are born to do things?" Pubis shook his head. "Learn from your brother, Hades. You've already died once. Can't you live for yourself?" Hades frowned and glared at him unhappily. "If it weren't for him, how could all of this have fallen to such a degree? And now you're asking me to learn from him?" What are you thinking in that head of yours? I know, Pubis said calmly. But he has made me. Hetty, said Publius calmly, as you have made me. We're all the same. The dying man stared greedily at the stars and murmured softly, we all live in our own cages, but we all crave the things in other people's cages. We all want to escape, but in the end, we all return to where we started. Could all of this be part of fate? How laughable. Enough. Hades angrily interrupted him. Now that things have come to this, is there any meaning in saying this to a clone? Of course there is, Hades, Pubis replied seriously. He no longer looked at the dazzling starry sky. Instead, he forcefully raised his eyes and looked at the person beside him. He solemnly said, Aren't you also my friend? Hades stared blankly for a moment. He wanted to scoff and retort, but then he saw Pubis raise his finger. An invisible force bound his body. An array as thin as a gossamer slowly spread out from Pubis' fingertips. He had used up the last drop of God's blood to forcibly open up the distance between the depths of his body. He had opened the door to hell for him. In his daze, the sound of chains breaking could be heard. It was the sound of the commandments engraved in the deepest part of his consciousness cracking. The compulsory mission left behind by the alchemists of the past quickly dissipated and disappeared without a trace. This was the final miracle created by the Grandmaster Pubis. Hey you, by the time Hades finally understood what had happened, it was already too late. He was pulled by the invisible force and quickly flew away from Helios, flying towards hell. Don't live in a cage, Hades. Go outside the cage. Publius smiled and said his goodbyes before the door slammed shut. My friend, please go and seek your own future. Even if the entire world stands in your way, even if you lose everything, even if this future leads you to hell, it doesn't matter. You must learn to live for yourself and seek your own meaning. If you occasionally recall all of this in your spare time in the future, if you can still remember me, remember that pitiful creature who longed for immortality but perished because of it. Then laugh loudly. Laugh at that fool who overestimated himself. In the end, please mourn for me. Just like that, accompanied by his final prayer, the glimmer of light slowly dissipated. Publius sighed and closed his eyes. He calmly welcomed death. There was no more fear. Just like that, this short eternity came to an end. Chapter 908. The long slumber seemed to be never-ending. But in the interval between drowsiness and drowsiness, Huaishur was awakened by a sound from beside him. He opened his eyes and saw the broken ceiling. It was in an abandoned temple. Through the collapsed roof, he could see the shining stars. It didn't seem like he was in the distant space at all, as if he was still somewhere in the present world. Beside him, the bonfire was burning vigorously, giving off a warm feeling. Huaishur tried to move his body, but then he felt a sharp pain in all parts of his body that went deep into his bone marrow. It was difficult to move, and he couldn't even feel half of his body, numb, because there was a husky bigger than a motorcycle, half of its butt was pressed against his chest. It was roasting by the fire, sleeping soundly, and snoring loudly. Its snot bubbles were huge, and its saliva had accumulated in a large pool on the ground. In its sleep, its tail was sweeping his face from time to time. Huaishur couldn't help but sneeze twice, and he pushed the dog's tail and half of its butt to the side. He could finally breathe easily. If he woke up a little later, he might have to be amputated. Huaishur sucked in a breath of cold air, propped up his body in pain, leaned against the wall, and looked around. The empty temple hadn't been tidied up yet, and the statue of the god was gone. Only the sound of conversation came from the direction of the door. It was Izzy and another person. This noble of America didn't smoke a cigar anymore. Instead, she stood at the bottom of the steps with her head lowered, as if she was listening to a lecture and teaching. Please tell Mamakiria for me. The figure with his back to Huaishur reached out and took the small box from his hand. Thank you for her foresight and care, but unfortunately, I can't repay her. I will. Izzy nodded solemnly. Sensing Huaishur's gaze, she smiled and bowed to the god in front of her. Then, I won't disturb you anymore. Ah, you're leaving just like that? Don't you want to stay a little longer? Wait a moment. Balder magically pulled out a huge jar from the air and placed it in Izzy's arms. It's rare for you to come here. Take some honey wine back. I just brewed it a few days ago. Put it in your refrigerator. It should be able to last for a long time. But don't drink it after it's expired. Just throw it away. You'll get diarrhea. Izzy hugged the wine jar, her face twitching. She nodded. Please allow me to leave. Okay. Balder nodded. However, Izzy was still standing in place, as if she was waiting for something. When she saw that Balder didn't react, she was stunned for a moment and hesitated. Right, I almost forgot about the procedure of your audience. Balder raised his hand and patted his forehead. He finally remembered. He dipped his hand into the wine jar and sprinkled 2 drops on Izzy's forehead. Traveler from afar, I bless you. I wish you, he thought for a long time and said seriously, I hope your family has more good wine than you can finish. The seemingly casual but actually very sincere blessing was done just like that. Izzy's expression was indescribably complicated. She had never seen such a sincere blessing, and she didn't need the blessing. It was too easy for a higher race with noble blood to get drunk. How could there be a time when they couldn't drink wine? But after all, it was the gods' wish and blessing. It was proof of an audience. As a messenger, she had no room to choose. She only hoped that Mamakiria could get used to drinking this jar of honey wine. Just like that, Izzy from America hugged the gift from Balder, took a few steps back, and turned to leave with a bitter smile. And in front of the temple, the figure reflected in the radiance finally turned around and looked over, smiling, holy and solemn. Unfortunately, the range didn't include the golden mohawk hair on the top of his head. It looked very dramatic. Huaisher couldn't help but want to pull him down. Can't you change your hairstyle? Huaisher slumped against the wall and complained helplessly. I was born like this. I can't help it. I'm used to it. Balder shrugged and returned to his side. He sat down cross-legged, opened the lid of the water tank next to him, and poured himself a large glass of honey wine. He also stuffed Huaisher glass. He raised his head and drank it all in one gulp. Like a fat otaku drinking happy water, he let out a long sigh of satisfaction. It's great. I didn't expect to be able to drink honey wine again. Long live the current world. Long live the Astronomy Association. Huaisher's expression suddenly twitched. Is this guy the god of light, or some damn otaku? Hey, can you at least act like a god? But I'm the one who doesn't look like a god the most. Balder scratched his head awkwardly. Not only do you not look like a god, you don't even look like a Viking. My father used to say a lot about this. If this goes on, it will be difficult for mortals to revere me. But, in my opinion, it doesn't matter if they revere me or not. It's best if everyone can drink and eat meat together. That makes sense. Huaisher nodded. Drinking and eating meat were the most important things. Right? Balder laughed happily. Cheers. Crack. A crisp sound rang out. It didn't come from where the glasses were clinking, but from Balder's increasingly illusory body. Huaisher paused. He sensed that something was wrong. Balder gradually became embarrassed and looked away in embarrassment. Oh, is it coming so soon? It's much faster than I expected. Crack. Another crisp sound rang out. He lowered his head and saw the crack in his chest. Inside his body, the incomplete sun wheel slowly rotated, exuding a brilliant light that grew brighter and brighter. It seemed to be growing. Compared to what Huaisher had seen before, half had already recovered to 2/3, and the recovery speed seemed to be accelerating. It should have been a good thing, but Huaisher saw traces of uneasiness and resistance on Balder's face. Suddenly, he felt a subtle sense of weightlessness. It was as if he was on a speeding train. What's going on? Huaisher frowned. It seems that a dong alone can't lock that part of me. Balder shook his head helplessly. Beside Huaisher, the sleeping dog slowly turned over. Wisps of light constantly seeped out of its fur and floated toward Balder. It was the power of the King of Light. It should have returned to his power long ago. Well, as you can see, it seems that we're about to fall into the present realm. Balder smiled awkwardly. Sorry, I couldn't control myself. He couldn't resist this attraction from the present realm. As Balder gradually recovered, the gravitational force of the pillar of light gradually increased, pulling at his existence and drawing him back. This was a restraint from the heavens, whether it was Balder or Publius. Even though Publius was dead, his god-creating mystic apparatus had succeeded. The dead gods had been resurrected. If it wasn't controlled early, under the pull of the gravitational force, Helios would once again resume its operation from a stagnant state and begin to accelerate endlessly. With its own mass and the seed of the gods, it would trigger a huge impact on the present realm and the three great seals. Because of this, Balder would let Fenrir, who was supported by Hwaishur's divine soul, devour the blazing sun instead of letting it return to his body after killing it. Unfortunately, Fenrir's miraculous engraving couldn't be delayed for too long. I didn't expect that one day I would die from falling. It's a good match for the god's high and mighty appearance. Balder sighed self-deprecatingly. I originally planned to muddle through and go home to take a look. Unfortunately, home is too far away. He said, "It's too late." "Wait, Balder." Hwaishur subconsciously reached out and grabbed Balder's shoulder, afraid that he would disappear just like that. "Wait a minute, there might be a solution." "No, I just suddenly figured it out." Balder smiled calmly and told his friend in front of him, "My home is no longer in that place." "Hwaishur, my home is gone." There was no longer a home for him in this world. Since hundreds of years ago, Hwaishur fell into silence and was speechless. He couldn't find any words to comfort him. "Haha, don't be so depressed." Balder patted him on the shoulder. "Anyway, it doesn't matter if you don't go home. In fact, before this, I once watched a short film in the screening room of Helios." He recalled the after-images in his memory and said absent-mindedly, "It's about a lonely old man living at sea in a very high house with many floors. His life was peaceful and peaceful. But the sea level rises every year, so he has to build houses at a higher level. After a long time, all the houses will be piled up like building blocks. When the sea level rises, the former residents will be submerged, along with the furniture, memories, and photos of the past. When he suddenly looks back one day, there is a huge city underwater that has been submerged and forgotten. He will understand that everything in the past will disappear into the sea. So, I think it's a good thing to be able to live on the ship this time." Balder shrugged in relief. "At least I don't have to think about the old house in the sea anymore, right?" Hwaishur didn't speak, but in the silence, the sense of weightlessness intensified again. Helios began to speed up. "It seems that I have to go, Hwaishur." Balder reached out and took out a squeaking little white mouse from his pocket and put it in Hwaishur's arms. "One last favor. Take care of it for me. Fishball likes you very much. You two will definitely get along." Hwaishur opened his mouth to speak, but the feeling of dizziness grew stronger. The power from the divine wine soaked into his soul and healed his damage, but caused his consciousness to become dizzy again. The wine glass fell from his hand. He forced his eyes open, trying to see the outline in front of him clearly. "Wait a minute, you have to say goodbye, Hwaishur." Balder looked back at him and waved his hand. "Just take it that I'm going on a long journey. You don't have to send me off. That's not where you should go." His footsteps paused for a moment, but he didn't look back. He just said goodbye softly. "You have to return to the world, Hwaishur," he said. "Go back to your loved ones. Don't let them die. Let them all live." Then darkness struck. In this way, Balder carefully cut off the connection with Hwaishur, maintained the integrity of his soul, and walked out of the door. Finally, he looked at the swaying stars. When he opened the small box in his pocket and picked up the mistletoe, his expression fell into struggle and hesitation. Several times, he gritted his teeth and made a move, but he didn't have the courage to make up his mind. It was embarrassing. He was afraid of pain, until a strange voice came from beside him. "If you can't do it, do you need my help?" The one who spoke was Tangi, who was leaning against the pillar of the temple. Balder felt as if he had been pardoned and let out a long breath. "Thank you so much. It's okay. I'm an understanding and kind-hearted big sister." Tangi took the mistletoe and blinked at him. "Besides, I'll have to trouble you to take care of my family's contractor. There's no need to declare sovereignty at this time, right?" Balder shook his head and sighed. I didn't expect you to be the one to send me off. Is this the so-called fate? Tangi lowered her head and played with the mistletoe in her hand, but she wasn't in a hurry to make a move. Instead, she suddenly asked, "Hey, Balder, do you know what the essence of fate is?" Balder was puzzled. After thinking for a moment, he asked, "The future? Or everything that's destined to happen?" "Who knows?" Tangi said casually. "Ordinary people revere fate because it's unknowable, while gods revere fate because it's uncontrollable. No matter how well you plan, there will always be problems in unexpected places. Your father suffered a great loss because of this. It sounds like it really makes me, his son, a little embarrassed. Everyone has suffered the same loss. There's nothing to be embarrassed about." Tangi paused for a moment and said solemnly, "However, as far as I know, sometimes at some important times, fate itself will also be interfered with." Interfered with? Balder shook his head. Is fate still fate after being interfered with? Maybe it's destined to be interfered with, right? Anyway, it's an ambiguous thing. No matter how you explain it, it makes sense. But if you look at its essence, you'll feel that it's actually a bitch with no principles at all. Tangi said, "Because it will stand on the winning side. To be precise, it will stand on the heavier side. It's like a strange scale, a black box that's constantly changing. In modern terms, it should be in a superposition state, right?" It sounded too sci-fi, and it had nothing to do with us gods at all. However, when the two fates collided, one of them was destined to be crushed. When the superposition state begins to collapse, the more powerful observer will emerge victorious. So, there will be a very small probability of things happening in the details, leading to an endless stream of variables. One side seems to have a slim chance of survival, but there's a chance of success. But in reality, it's already destined to be defeated. That's just a hypothesis, right? Balder shook his head. There's no definite proof. It's still a wild guess. Sometimes, it's more romantic when there's a little ambiguity and ambiguity. I don't think you understand this principle, right? Tangi did not insist that her statement was correct. Instead, it was as if she was talking about an interesting rumor. She was full of enthusiasm. Even if there are flaws and groundless accusations, at least it can explain everything that happened, right? The influence of the mystic instrument of creation and the possible consequences are too great for the present, causing fate to deviate spontaneously and want to correct everything back on the right track. That's why all of this happened. That's why there were so many coincidences. Because of the attraction of a superior like the sun god, Huaishur, who inherited the path of heaven's inquisition, came to Helios. Because the rebirth of a god outside the present realm was a huge disaster for the present realm. Therefore, the god who would not hurt others for himself, and who is also the easiest to kill, would descend. In other words, your arrival is also the choice of fate. This is probably heaven's will, right? Tangi said indifferently. Maybe it's purely a coincidence. She said, "It depends on which one you like. Are you comforting me?" Balder froze for a moment and smiled gratefully. "It sounds like the present world has chosen me. That's not a bad way to put it. Don't you feel resentful?" Tangi asked. "You're destined to die." "No." Balder shook his head. "Don't you feel regret?" "A little." Balder sighed with emotion. "If there's any wish, I really want to see the present world. But the world that Huaishur talked about is so beautiful. It would be a pity if it disappeared because of me. You chose the world between yourself and the world." Tangi nodded. "That's really your style, Balder. Am I actually that noble?" "Yes, after all, you're the kind of person who doesn't want to make others sad." Balder shook his head. "This is not a compliment for a Norse god. It's enough that it means something to you." Tangi paused for a moment with a solemn expression. She expressed her gratitude to the god in front of her. "Thank you for everything you've done for Huaishur, Balder." She said, "Thank you." Balder scratched his face a little embarrassedly. "Then will you mourn for me, former Lord Tai?" "No, I won't." Tangi's expression became disdainful. "No one will sympathize with a guy who talks about the dark history of a kind-hearted person. Besides, isn't there an agreement waiting for you?" She reminded him that the agreement that belongs to you alone. Balder froze in place. You still remember her, don't you? The person who was waiting for you. For so many years, she has always kept her promise. With her last obsession, she is alone in hell, sleeping in a place without light, waiting for your arrival, day after day, year after year. Now, it's time to keep your promise, Balder. This time, will you still keep your promise? Of course. Balder nodded and answered frankly. How can I let her be alone? Very good, Balder. Tangi said approvingly. You are indeed the kindest god. At that moment, the mistletoe pierced his chest. He did not feel pain or fear. The god was silently collapsing. When this moment came, Balder raised his head and stared at the person in front of him, waiting for her to say that sentence. That incantation that would truly end everything. And so, just like many years ago, just like the end of every story about Balder, Tangi raised her head as if declaring to fate. Once again, he uttered the same sentence. Let Hela get what she wants. At that moment, the invisible bridge was connected again. In front of Balder, a black door appeared silently and opened. In the deepest part of the darkness, a distant figure appeared and gradually became clear. Across this door that existed and was void, she stared blankly at the figure who had fulfilled his promise. As if she could not believe it, she did not dare to reach out to touch his face. Sorry to have kept you waiting. Balder smiled, reached out, and held her hand tightly. I'm here to fulfill my promise, Hela. Then, he spread his arms and hugged the lonely illusion. This time, I won't let you be alone again, just like that. Without any hesitation, light and death held hands and followed her into the distant darkness. But before leaving, he took one last look at everything behind him. He smiled and said goodbye. He expressed his gratitude for this short meeting. Farewell, my friend. Please mourn for me. Are they really leaving just like that? Tangi stood where she was and stared at the place where they had disappeared. She could not help but sigh and shake her head. They really left a huge mess for me to clean up. And you, Zeus, shouldn't you get lost too? The show is over. I'm different from Odin's son. As long as I can still struggle at death's door for a while, I'll shamelessly continue to dawdle. Zeus's incomplete illusion appeared and looked around. Besides, isn't this not over yet? The most important ending hasn't even begun yet. At the place where the god had disappeared, an even more brilliant flame rose and spread, causing the halo of the sun around Helios to become even more dazzling. That was the fountain of light that was about to erupt. Although Balder's divine soul had passed away, this was not the present realm. This power could not pass through the axis of the world and successfully return. If this continued, it would be more troublesome if it was absorbed by Helios or used by someone else, wouldn't it? Zeus wanted to see how she would deal with the final ending. It's very simple, Zeus. Tangi calmly stared at the mistletoe in her hand and said, we just need to perform the ritual just now again and consume the remaining power. Zeus frowned in confusion. It was hard to understand. Indeed, this was a solution. But the problem was, Balder was already dead. How could they kill him again? Isn't there a ready-made one? Tangi turned around and looked at the temple. There was indeed a ready-made replacement there. An existence that had once borne Balder's divine descent and could almost be regarded as the mortal incarnation of the King of Light. As a candidate to replace Balder, there was indeed no one better. But the problem was, you can even think of this. Zeus fell into a daze and was dumbfounded. Are you still human? Didn't you say that contractors were very important and should be cherished? Even someone as shameless as him had never thought that there would be such a wicked operation in the world. It would shock Olympus for an entire year. Don't worry, ordinary people can't do it, but it definitely won't be a problem for him. Before he became Balder's divine descent, he was my contractor. Tangi turned around and smiled. I have to have confidence in the person I choose. Besides, I don't want to see my contractor sad. Even if she couldn't redeem everything, she should at least leave him with something to remember. Chapter 909. Aren't you afraid of killing him? Instead, Zeus became worried. Don't worry, it's not unusual for him to die once or twice. Tangi waved her hand indifferently, lowered her head, and stared at Huai Shi's face. Should I say that you're lucky or unlucky? It just so happens that there's still the reflection crystal here. It's just a part of the advancement ceremony in advance, and it also comes with a protagonist level service of muscle and marrow replacement that is commonly seen in fantasy novels. You won't object, right? This is a rare blessing from God. I believe in you. Before she finished speaking, the mistletoe, as sharp as a sword, sank into Huai Shi's chest. There was a mighty roar, and the nothingness of the sun that surrounded Helios suddenly shook and began to shrink violently, along with the endless brilliance, inward. Before the phenomenon of the reflection spring appeared, it had already poured into Huai Shi's body under the guidance of the mistletoe, permeating every part and illuminating the eternal darkness of the ultimate. Finally, it merged into the deepest part of the soul. Under the illumination of the light, the crown on Tangi's head appeared again, and under the illusion, it once again showed its majesty. Reaching out to control this miracle created by God, she announced in a solemn voice, "Here, thou shalt reenact Baldur's death and return this divine power to the world." This was instantly transmitted to the core of the realm of reality, along with the resonance between the light and the realm of reality. It was a choice like a whale's fall. At the cost of God's own fall, she returned the power that created her and gave everything back to the entire realm of reality. At this moment, as the vessel of the divine power, Huai Shi would also be regarded as a part of it, inheriting the correction value brought by this whale's fall. And the price was that his soul would be dissolved by the divine power. It turned into a gentle rain of light at this moment and flew toward the realm of reality. You're not even trying to redeem it? Zeus was stunned. Once the divine power returns to the realm of reality, his soul will be completely divided into countless parts and return to the Silver Sea. At that time, there will be no saving him. Tangi laughed. Oh, are you worried about my contractor? Zeus was speechless. Although he didn't like the woman in front of him and hoped that she would be unlucky and fall into the abyss to her death, he actually felt that Huai Shi's death was too much of a pity. Such a valuable soul must be able to shine in the future, right? Even without the protection of a divine miracle, he would definitely be able to shine with his own brilliance. Don't worry, it's not over yet, Zeus. My contractor isn't just this. Tangi raised her head, taking advantage of this rare opportunity to reach the spirit essence pillar. She once again made her wish. Then, one more time, she smiled and chanted the incantation. Let hell get what she wants. This was the most important and irreplaceable aspect of Huai Shi as the carrier of secret ritual Baldur's death. Through what had happened in history, it was forced to reenact it. In the end, the predestined result was achieved. Let Baldur's soul return to hell. Therefore, in that instant, in the universe, in the almost endless rain of light, among the countless tiny soul fragments, a portion of them suddenly merged under the power of the secret ritual, forming the phantom of the white deer and flying quickly towards the present realm. It disappeared almost in the blink of an eye. At the same time, in the border of the dark net, deep in the huge library, a sleeping girl suddenly woke up from that terrifying dream and whispered subconsciously, "Mr. Huai Shi?" Before that, there was a light that crossed the boundary between the border and the present realm. It went straight through countless defenses, passed through the frames of the three creators, and landed in front of the girl, turning into the image of the white deer again. Lily looked up in shock and looked at the familiar white deer in front of her. The white deer was also looking at her. It leaned over and sniffed her scent. Then it gently touched her cheek once and again. In the end, when the three creators rushed over with the alarm, they only saw the white deer leaning against the girl, eating the pages she fed it and protecting her safety. What is this? KP scratched his head. Why does my identification interface show that this thing is Huai Shi? DM smiled and shook his head without saying anything. ST was silent for a long time and sighed helplessly. Just treat it as a gift from that kid. Don't worry about it. The three of them stared at this scene from afar. After a long time, they turned and left silently. You think it's over? On top of Helios, Tangi looked in the direction where the white deer disappeared and smiled. Then, let AI Ching get what she wants. Therefore, following the operation of the secret ritual in the rain of light, an illusory light condensed again, turning into the projection of the burning bull and flying towards the present realm. In the Astronomy Association, the Decision Department of the Asia Territory Command. In the busy overhead building, an alarm suddenly sounded, and a crimson light flashed violently. Then, countless lights and shadows rose and shrouded the building. But the flame that fell from the sky quickly passed through the gaps between the frames, broke through the wall, and broke into the solemn office. Soon, in the cold wind, AI Ching stared expressionlessly at the cute calf in front of her that was obediently lying on the ground and wagging its tail. Then, she turned back and glanced at the Iron Legion that rushed in. She lit the cigarette at the corner of her mouth in annoyance and couldn't help but sigh. You really know how to cause trouble for me. On top of Helios, Tangi suddenly reached out and picked up the dog that was pretending to be dead. Before it could show a fawning look, it saw the happy smile from its big sister. Then the world spun. It was violently swung up and thrown into the universe outside of Helios. It was accompanied by Tangi's words. Let Fu-Yi get what she wants. Then, Bichimos once again turned into the hammer of pain and absorbed a part of the soul. It smashed through the defense of Imperial University, triggering the attack alarm, and fell into the classroom where a lecture was being held. It stuck out its tongue and looked blankly at the dilapidated scene around it. When it saw the girl whose eyes were twitching under the teacher's protection, it smiled evilly and happily pounced on her while spitting saliva. I'm back after having fun outside. The impact from the dog's head made Fu-Yi groan and want to hit someone. Sensing the teacher's dangerous gaze, she became uneasy and subconsciously wanted to shift the responsibility. I don't have to pay for the maintenance fees, right? Teacher, you've heard that this is force majeure. Count it in your internship salary. The teacher coldly pushed up his glasses. It will start next month. Then, let Luo Xian get what she wants. Accompanied by Tangi's shout, the white horse of the Sword of Virtue came out of the rain of light and galloped towards the present place. India, in the deepest part of a dark temple. In the hellish sea of blood, the lonely traveler stopped and looked away from the camera in his hand to look behind him in shock. It was a handsome white horse that came out of the void, glowing. Did you come to play with me? Luo Xian smiled and scratched its shin. Then let's go together. Coincidentally, there's still a long journey ahead. She put her luggage on the saddle, took the reins, and walked deeper into the darkness. She happily hummed a ballad. On top of Helios, Tangi, who finished a long string of words in one breath, took a deep breath, wiped the fine sweat on her forehead, and sighed helplessly. It's really tiring to have a contractor who likes to flirt. There shouldn't be anything left, right? There shouldn't be anything left, right? Since everyone had already taken their share, the rest, I'm under a lot of pressure, so I won't hold back. Tangi put her hands on her hips and shouted proudly, the rest is all mine. So in an instant, the rain of light trembled violently, and a large part of it turned back towards Helios, turning into a flock of crows that filled the sky. Finally, it surged and fell on the huge temple and Tangi's shoulder. A giant python emerged from the shadow and coiled around her arm, turning into a gorgeous bracelet. But there were still a large number of soul fragments that flew along with the rain of light. What about the rest? Zeus asked. I've helped him take care of most of it. Shouldn't I let him work hard for the rest? Tangi waved her hand indifferently. Don't worry. He has a deep relationship with the present realm. It's just a gathering. It won't be a problem for him. Just like that, the dazzling rain of light flew across the cold universe, crossed the distant scale, and fell to every place in the present realm along with the surging divine power. The love and compassion from the King of Light sprinkled in every corner, looking back at the source. And in America, in an ancient temple, An old woman holding a needle and thread raised her hand and stared at the light spot that fell on her palm, as if sighing and rejoicing. "Welcome back, Balder." Mamakiria raised her hand and sent the light spot into the breeze. She stared at it as it went away and dissipated and softly wished, "May you sleep peacefully in this generation." In the distance, only the sound of the wind responded. In a long dream, Huaishur felt that he was falling. In the endless darkness, the loneliness made people want to go crazy. But it seemed that there was someone by his side, traveling with him. His heart seemed to be vaguely comforted, and he was not so afraid. You see, the so-called meeting and parting is so simple, it's always common. The calm voice told him, "So, when you meet, you should laugh as much as you can, so that you won't have any regrets when you part. After saying goodbye seriously, when you go on the road alone again, you won't be too reluctant to part." When he walked to a certain place, he stopped and said to Huaishur, "I'll send you here. You should go home." "But what about you?" Huaishur asked. "Where are you going?" "I'm going back to my home, to the people who love me," the voice said seriously. "You have to be the same, Huaishur. There are people who love you waiting for you." "Will we meet again?" "Of course." The person who left stopped and looked back with a smile. "I'm everywhere, Huaishur. I'll always watch your back, and I'll always be by your side. So goodbye." "Goodbye." The free and easy figure went to a darker place and disappeared. In the vast darkness, Huaishur didn't know how to move forward. They were lost in this maze that they couldn't see the outline of and couldn't see the end of. But soon, bits of light appeared, and a familiar voice came from afar, guiding him forward in the darkness. At that moment, he seemed to have come to a hospital he had never been to. He heard a question from behind the window. "Name?" Chapter 9:10. Name: Ingzhou, Dongbui University Affiliated Medical Research Center. The staff member behind the window asked. "Tomoko Chia." "How old are you?" 17 years old. "Please sign here." "Thank you." The staff member handed over a form from under the window and pointed to a few places to sign. After taking back the form, the staff member picked up a paper bag from the side and handed it over. In the bag were 5 boxes of injections printed with the Ivory Tower logo and a set of needleless syringes. According to the instructions, injections will be given once a week during the acute period. After a course of treatment, injections will be given once a month. Next, it is recommended that you rest for another week. If you still experience dizziness or irregular heartbeat, please contact the medical staff immediately. Also, please sign here. Okay. The girl put down the pen and handed in the final document. Then, congratulations on your recovery and discharge. The staff member stamped the document and solemnly said goodbye. "Thank you for your sacrifice and contribution." No. I'm the one who's been taken care of." Before the girl could finish speaking, the girl next to her, who was so excited that tears were flowing down her face, had already rushed over and hugged her. Wah. I'm so happy. Tears and snot were all smeared on her new clothes. Junshi, calm down. She pushed her away with difficulty and tried to struggle. "I'm just cooperating with the research. It's not that scary. I can't breathe. I'm fine." She rubbed her hard twice and finally reluctantly let go of her hands. Then she sniffled, grabbed her hand, and walked out of the door. "Let's go eat barbecue. Let's celebrate. I've recently received my salary." "But she still owes a lot of loans, right? You've been very unlucky recently, right? It's okay. I've been in debt for so long. It doesn't matter if I pay 1 or 2 less." Bang! Outside the hospital, a dilapidated light box fell without warning and accurately and subtly covered the girl who was beside herself with joy. Dust flew everywhere. Next to her, she was stunned. She subconsciously turned back and looked in the direction of the hospital's emergency room. Let's go and register first." Name? When a speeding car suddenly stopped, the young man who was tied up in the dark heard the trunk being opened. Then, an unfamiliar voice asked him a question. The masked man struggled subconsciously and looked up uneasily. "Where's this place? Who are you?" "I'm asking you for your name." The man who asked the question flicked the ash from his cigarette. Can't you hear me? Kid, forget it. My name is Yamashita. You should have heard of this name before, right? After all, not many people are bold enough to attack our truck. I have nothing to say to you evil lackeys. The young man couldn't restrain his anger and roared, If you want to kill me, then kill me. Do you think I'll give in just because you get me out of jail? In your dreams. Hey, listen to me. Yamashita sighed helplessly. With a cigarette in his mouth, he punched him in the face without warning. There was a muffled groan, and blood seeped out through the mask. Our side is the damaged side, bastard. Yamashita complained. He raised his fist and was about to punch again when he heard a voice from the chair behind him. Forget it, Mr. Yamashita. Forrest Hutt held his chin and said in boredom, You can't be reckless when you meet someone who's stubborn. Let me talk to him. Yamashita nodded and reached out to take off the young man's mask. He walked to the side silently. The young man who was tied up finally raised his head and tried to raise his neck, tried to see the scene around him clearly. But he couldn't see anything clearly. Under a dazzling directional light, he could only vaguely see a blurry silhouette beside the light, and behind him, the surging waves on the beach. He was brought here directly by the people of Hawaii Paper Group. He sucked in a breath of cold air. Valor from the outer court, right? A young voice came from the side of the light. It seemed that the person was bending down on the chair and asking, 19 years old, born in Yomi no Kuni, and also has the characteristics of a beast. I didn't expect that he would be able to commit such a big crime as attacking Washiki Trading Company. What a promising young man. Gwandu spat out a mouthful of blood and looked away coldly. 2 days ago, you and your accomplices attacked our van. Forrest Hutt flipped through the file in his hand and sighed. Because of you, more than a few hundred meters of railway was blown up, 6 carriages derailed, 12 staff members were injured, and our shipping plan was delayed. Well, for hours. The economic loss caused by this is even more frightening. Because of this, more than 1,000 special drugs were damaged, not to mention the part that you stole. Each of them was sold at a price of $160,000 US. Wow, a heavy loss. You can calculate how big a mess you've made. What? Villains like you also feel heartache? Courage from the outer court sneered. What I love the most is to see you guys grieving like you've lost your parents. I'm suddenly treated as a villain. I feel helpless. Fine, I am a villain. Forrest Hutt scratched his head. What I'm curious about is, why didn't you attack earlier or later? Why did you choose to attack our delivery van? You should know that the van in front was filled with gold. Or is your information wrong? Do I care about your stinky money? Valor was furious. He glared at that person under the glaring lights. It's because of villains like you that the special drugs are monopolized. You've used them as tools to extract profits. So many innocent people who can't afford to pay can only suffer and let you squeeze them. He roared. You will suffer retribution. There was a strange silence. Forrest Hutt and Valor looked at each other. After a long time, they shrugged. Well, it seems that there are no external forces involved. As he spoke, he sighed and looked at the angry young man. Although the other party seemed to be older than him. You're a Cinder, right? So what if I am? Valor raised his head. Do you think that you're the only one who can control power? As long as YG Group exists, there will always be people like me standing up. Until the day you villains are burned to ashes. Yes, maybe there will be such a day. The little house in the woods laughed happily. But I finally understand. As he spoke, he suddenly pointed at the person in front of him and said firmly, You're the legendary Chinibi, right? There was an awkward silence. Valor didn't say anything. He just glared at this guy, trembling with anger. I know, I understand. In this country, arrogant young people like you often talk about justice and eliminating evil. You think you're special, that you have the righteousness and the truth in your hands. It's really difficult to deal with you. They can't talk, they can't understand, they can't do it, they may not be willing to do it. Forrest Hutt thought for a while and said seriously, So, why don't we be frank and honest? Valor sneered, not taking it seriously. However, he still raised his hands seriously. You have 2 choices. First, seeing that you are still useful, you will work for us from today until you pay back all the losses you have caused. By the way, the interest will be paid according to our society's rules. Kill me if you want. Do you think I will? Valor sneered, but his voice was interrupted by the young man who stood up in front of him. As for the second choice, it's my favorite. The dazzling light disappeared because endless darkness rose. As the silhouette stepped forward, it turned into an ink-like shadow, covering his face. The darkness seemed to have substance, turning into layers of cold snake shadows, spreading over his skin, as if it wanted to penetrate his body through his twitching facial features and pierce his soul. Then, a cold palm pressed against his forehead. Don't tell me you think you can die once and for all. Forrest Hutt leaned over and looked down at the ignorant man in front of him, his eyes scarlet. Ascenders are very valuable. Valor. More valuable than you can imagine. Bone marrow can be used to pair with the sick. Internal organs can be used for medical experiments. Skin can be made into precious curse vessels. Blood is a material for many alchemy potions. And even hair can be sold for a good price in the wig market. Your eyes, nose, ears, organs, and even bones will soon leave you. They will be sold in South America, Russia, and Rome. I can guarantee that you will still be alive when that time comes. Even your soul will be able to continuously extract origin substance and pay off your debt in the long run. Until one day, a long, so long that one couldn't see the end of it, one's origin substance would be sucked dry to the very last drop. One would finally die in despair, and the ashes of one's soul would be absorbed into the relics at the border. Just like a pig on an assembly line, no part will be wasted. Forrest Hutt gently stroked his hair and told him, Valor. You will create new value. The kind of gaze, the expression on the waiter's face twitched. It was difficult to describe the expression he saw at that moment. It was as if a butcher was lovingly staring at fresh meat on the chopping board, with greed and ferocity that seeped deep into his bones. He was full of expectations. Now, tell me. Forrest Hutt stroked his hair, looked up at the night sky, and asked casually, which one will you choose? Chapter 9:11. Silence. A long silence. Under the dazzling light, Wigwan's straight spine seemed to have been broken. Bit by bit, it bent down. After a long time, there was a whine in response. So Wigwan nodded happily and waved his hand behind him. The black market doctor, who had been waiting for a long time, clicked his tongue unhappily and turned to leave. It was a wasted trip. Bad luck. It wasn't until the hand finally left his head that waiter could finally catch his breath. It was as if he had been stuffed into the deep sea and endured a long suffocation. He greedily breathed in every bit of air. Tears and snot flowed out uncontrollably. He wailed loudly. Okay, good boy. Wigwan reached out and untied him. He squatted in front of him and smiled as he picked up his hand and shook it. From today onwards, let's be good friends. Okay. Wigwan nodded dully, like a walking corpse. Little Hutt in the woods nodded, took out a mobile phone, and handed it to him. Remember to tell your friend not to rob the truck anymore. Although we have taken back the medicine that was stolen, hurry up and send the hidden part back to me. There are 16 types of special drugs for different animal characteristics. If they are used indiscriminately, they will really die. Of course, it is also necessary to persuade them to turn themselves in and tell us the source of the information and the instigator. Okay, Wigwan nodded numbly. Finally, from today onwards, learn to watch the news. You people of Ingzhou should change your *T conduct as soon as possible. Wigwan tilted his head, took the cigarette from the corner of his mouth, and stomped it out. He said disdainfully, this thing was given out for free in Doomsday yesterday. If you register, you get 2 free courses. If you don't register, it's 5,000 Ingzhou dollars per box. It's almost cheaper than cold medicine. Do the math yourself. How much can you exchange for the train you blew up? Silence. A long silence. Wigwan raised his head with difficulty. He was stunned and couldn't understand what he had heard. Huh? Name? The staff behind the window looked up. Tatishi. The embarrassed middle-aged man sat on a chair, pinching his wrinkled border passport. Tatishi Shinya, 31 years old. This is my daughter, to Tisha Uenko, he pulled the dazed girl over and shook her shoulder. The girl, who seemed to be dozing off, quickly opened her eyes. As if she had rehearsed this, she nervously smiled at the window. "She's healthy, very capable," Standing Rock nervously explained. "Don't be fooled by her young appearance. She's already 17 years old. She could do more work than some adults. She can wash clothes and cook." "Really, she... Under the scrutinizing gaze of the staff, the middle-aged man's expression gradually became weary. He said incoherently, "I beg you, she really can work. She can. I can do it too. I can do more. I could do anything. Hey, hurry up." The people behind him urged him on, and the sound of children crying could be heard. Standing Rock's lips moved, but he couldn't speak. His face gradually turned pale. In the noisy office hall, a long line had been formed from a hall to the square. Many travel-worn people were lining up outside. They would rather be exposed to the scorching sun than go to the nearby, free drinking water to enjoy the air conditioning. They were afraid of being delayed. Behind the window, the staff's scrutiny continued for a while. Soon, a calm voice came from the loudspeaker. "Mr. Standing Rock, I saw you write on your form that you have experience in musical instrument performance, right? Trumpet player?" Yes. Standing Rock felt as if he had been pardoned. He nodded in a hurry. "Although I haven't practiced for many years, I can pick it up again. It will be very fast. Since that's the case, you can fill out a new application form for artists after you've registered. You can go through the special recruitment route of Doomsday Music Hall and register at Window B2. They've been short of manpower recently, so the salary will be much higher." The staff member calmly took a photo, stamped the form, and handed it over. Finally, he reminded, "Every family has a residence qualification, including the spouse, children, parents, and other immediate family members. I suggest you go to the next window and tell the truth." She withdrew her gaze from the confused girl and told the staff, "Dombwa doesn't need a little girl less than 12 years old to wash clothes." Everything that happened next was like a dream, but it was different from those nightmares. It went as smoothly as those ridiculous fantasies on the train. Standing Rock held his daughter's hand in a daze. He held the thick form in one hand and went from window to window. Finally, he arrived in front of the temporary infirmary. Standing in front of the counter, he swallowed his saliva. This is my household registration certificate," he asked uneasily. Is the injection here? The special medicine? The free one? Is it real?" "One adult, one girl." The busy nurse didn't have time to care about his emotions. She snatched the test form from his hand, flipped through it, stamped it again, and handed over 2 forms without hesitation. "Turn right inside. Just line up." Next, Standing Rock was pushed by the people behind him, but he mustered up the courage to ask again, "Is it really free?" "It's not free, sir." The nurse raised her head and looked over in surprise. She said, "You have to pay for the injection fee of 200 yuan per person. Please line up inside to pay." Next, he was pushed, urged, and scolded. Standing Rock was like duckweed, drifting with the waves. He looked at everything in front of him in a daze, but he couldn't react to anything. In the end, he was pushed into the injection room. It was still like sleepwalking. He was absent-minded. He looked at everything in front of him in a daze. He didn't even feel anything during the injection. There was only a slight pain, like the pain that could be seen everywhere in his life. "Adults, please ensure that you have enough food for a week. If minors have cold symptoms, please go to the nearest designated hospital and go to the special window." Next to him, the nurse who was giving instructions noticed his absent-minded look and frowned. Sir, are you listening?" But Standing Rock was still staring at his daughter in the injection room. His whole body was pressed against the glass, and he didn't dare to let her out of his sight. "She seems better than before. Look, she's much more energetic," he muttered to himself, not knowing who he was talking to. He couldn't help but smile. "She doesn't look so sleepy anymore, right? She's much better than before. She's just injected. It hasn't taken effect yet, sir," the nurse reminded him. But Standing Rock was still looking at his daughter in a daze. After a long time, he whispered, "But she'll get better, right?" The The nurse was stunned for a moment and nodded slowly. Yes, she'll get better. She smiled and replied, She'll be better than before, Mr. Standing Rock. The beeping sound came. She put the notice in her hand with the precautions in her hand into the middle-aged man's hand and turned to leave. Under the gentle sunlight outside the window, the thin paper fluttered slightly in the wind. The handwriting seemed to spread out and fly into the blue sky. There was an illusionary glimmer of light sprinkling down from the sky like rain, illuminating the last part of it. It wasn't printed in black. Instead, it looked like someone hurriedly grabbed a pen before leaving and wrote a blessing for a traveler coming from afar. Tell everyone who comes here. Welcome to Doomsday. Name? Outside the emergency room, the chief surgeon held the medical record in his hand and followed behind the emergency team to check the patient's information with the patient's family. But before entering the operating room, he paused and reminded with a solemn expression, the patient is old. Sudden organ failure. This kind of major surgery is risky. I hope you're prepared. Please, please. The haggard man bowed repeatedly and begged with hope. Please. I'll do my best. The doctor looked away and didn't look at the man's expectant face. 6 hours later, the emergency patient, Nakamura Yum, stopped breathing in the ward after the surgery. Cause of death, postoperative myocardial infarction. She was 54 years old. 2 minutes later, a baby's cry came from another operating room. Natural birth. Mother and daughter were safe. Have you thought of a name yet? In the ward, the nurse solemnly reminded, This is a big deal. Don't give the child a strange name. Mrs. Matsuda insisted on a very long name. It seems to be an album by some band. No matter how we persuade her, she won't listen. It's really worrying. The pale wife leaned on the bed, holding her husband's hand and staring at the baby sleeping soundly. She couldn't help but smile. Future, she thought for a moment and said seriously, Her name is Future. Then, in the darkness, Huaishur heard the name. He couldn't help but laugh. He applauded. Future. Name? In front of the checkpoint, the nervous girl answered in choppy Ingzhou language, Jin Suyuan. Name? In the interview, the young man summoned the courage to look up. Koori Shizuka. Name? On the street, the performer who played the violin handed over his ID card. Chen Cheng. Name? The fashionable girl stuck out her tongue. Big Field Hope. In the darkness, Huaishur looked up and heard the voices from afar. They were like countless tiny spots of light dancing in front of his eyes, illuminating the long and lonely road. There were more voices. There were more prayers, more thanks, and more calls. They guided him little by little forward, until he opened his eyes in a daze. Countless broken souls gathered again. They followed the guidance and stared at the light passing by in front of them. Unknowingly, the darkness had been illuminated by the endless light. The long and lonely road was full of pedestrians. In a lively crowd, the noise rose one after another. When he passed by, the souls that he had never met smiled at him gratefully, told him their names, and then returned to the crowd again. One name after another overlapped, holding up his soul and guiding him upward, returning from this cold and empty universe. He was in the brightly lit street. He was in the deserted alley. He was in the ward listening to the crying, and he stared at the sleeping face of the child under the warm light. When Huaishur looked up, he saw the mighty rain of light sprinkling from the night and falling into the hands of nothingness. Bit by bit, every ray of light carried the smiling face of a friend. It was as if he had finally woken up from this long dream since parting. It's good to be able to meet again, my friend. Huaishur stared at the rain of light all over the sky and smiled. After a long time, he bowed and said goodbye. He turned and walked deeper into the dream. Chapter 9:12. With just a trance, the reassembled soul would return to its body. But before that, there seemed to be something between the soul and the body, a dream from the past. That dream lingered on Helios, still slowly evaporating and dissipating. And for the first time, Huaishur barged into it as an outsider. But after Balder had passed away, whose dream was this? Huaishur looked around in confusion. Between the desolate world, The dark sky and the dark earth, surrounded by the forest, the withered knight sat on the back of a skinny horse, trudging through the mud with difficulty. Exhausted, he asked and pleaded to every living being. But he couldn't see Huaishur, who was like a phantom, because he didn't belong here. He was just a bystander. Then he saw the only bright color in this dark and oppressive world. It was like fire. Between the dried-up river and the mountains, there was a strand of scarlet that was shocking to the eye. It looked around indifferently, showing an incomparable sense of existence. It was as if she was the center of heaven and earth, the only valuable existence in this world. "Please, mourn for him." When the knight pleaded, he only received a disdainful look. On a mountain rock, the girl sitting there looked back coldly and arrogantly at him. It was a familiar face, so familiar, but he couldn't see the smile that Huaishur was familiar with. It wasn't gentle at all. It was completely different from everything he knew. It was full of wildness and fierceness, making people not dare to approach it. "Why?" she asked mockingly. "Just because he is Odin's son?" The knight didn't speak. After a long silence, he spoke again in a hoarse voice. "Then, please leave this land." The girl on the mountain rock laughed, as if she had heard a joke. "Just you?" In the dead silence, the knight slowly raised his hand and pressed it on the hilt of the sword at his waist. He clenched it tightly. The veins on the back of his hand were bulging. But under that pair of cold eyes, he didn't dare to move. "Don't draw your sword, Helmut. This is for your own good. Don't dig your own grave." She slowly withdrew her gaze and said disdainfully, "Go back and tell Odin that no matter what he wants, he can't get it from me." Helmut's beard trembled as he begged again in a humble manner. "I'm just begging for your mercy. Why should I pity him?" The girl on the rock asked. In order to let his son escape from the dispute between the fates, Odin regarded hell as a shelter. But if he doesn't even want to abide by the contract between him and the sanctuary, then his son can't be freed. He can't even go to hell. He can only wander in this world as a ghost forever. As if she was announcing fate, she said coldly, "This is the price he has to pay for acting smart. Aren't you the same, Dijun?" Helmut could not hide his anger as he roared hoarsely. "One day, you will suffer the same fate." Flames suddenly burst out from the pitch-black world. But it wasn't warm. Instead, it was extremely brutal and dyed everything scarlet. The old knight was suddenly set ablaze. From the inside out, his eyes, mouth, and nose spewed out blazing flames, interrupting his words and making him let out a hoarse scream, until the girl on the rock flicked her finger slightly, extinguishing the torment that was comparable to the burning sun. "This is just a small punishment, Helmut, as the price you have to pay for calling my name directly." She withdrew her gaze without interest. "Get lost." Soon, the skinny old horse supported the heavily injured knight and slowly left, disappearing from Huaishur's sight. Just as he was in a state of confusion, he sensed a cold gaze from beside him. She noticed that this outsider didn't belong here. The girl in the red dress held her chin and glanced over with disdain. And then, "Mortal, who are you?" Huaishur was stunned for a moment. Being stared at like that, a strange absurdity and conjecture rose in his heart. He wanted to say something, but stopped, unable to say anything. However, this astonishment and delay was interpreted as a form of resistance. In an instant, Huaishur felt that his neck was lifted and hung in the air. He couldn't resist at all. He was violently pulled up by that hand and choked by the neck. Only a pair of burning eyes stared at him. The fire was so bright but so cold. She said, "Since you don't speak forever." Huaishur struggled with all his might, trying to pry her hand away, but he couldn't shake the power of that hand at all. Even if he tried his best, he couldn't open a gap. He could only use all his strength to squeeze out a voice from his lungs. "Tangi, let go," he said. "I'm almost out of breath." At that moment, the girl seemed to be stunned and widened her eyes in disbelief. Finally, she sensed the existence of this dream. So, everything quickly began to dissipate. The barren land, the dark sky, and even everything in front of him, but only the sense of suffocation remained, making Huaishur struggle subconsciously, twisting his body and gasping for breath with difficulty. Finally, he opened his eyes. Then, he saw the figure sitting on his chest. That was really a heavy burden. You're awake? Tangi seemed to be fine. She closed the book in her hand and looked down at him happily. Are you feeling unwell? Huaishi's face was livid, and he pointed to his chest. I'm going to suffocate to death. What did you say? I can't hear you clearly. Tangi lowered her head in confusion, tied up her hair, and leaned over. Her bright red eyes, which were exactly the same as in the dream, stared at him, so close. Can you please make it clearer? I said. Huaishi took a deep breath with difficulty. Bitch, get away from me. With all his strength, the dying patient finally pushed the guy sitting on his body away. Then he lay on the ground and coughed violently. ICU? Where's the ICU? I need to be resuscitated. Wow. What did you say to the gentle big sister? Tangi squatted down and gloated at his sorry appearance. She reached out and poked his cheek. This is the price. Do you know Huaishi the price? Huaishi stared at her. This woman, from the past to the present, there was no change at all. But it was different from the past. Huaishi stared straight at her face. He didn't even bother to wipe the saliva that he coughed out. He stared at her cheek. It was a smile that was completely different from the one in the dream. The person in the dream looked so lonely, but so arrogant. It actually made people feel that she took the initiative to abandon this world, because no one could chase after her. What's wrong? Tangi squatted beside him and held her cheek. Is today also a day to be intoxicated by my peerless beauty? Don't look at it too much. What if you fall in love with me? Huaishi rolled his eyes. He didn't want to pay attention to her anymore. He turned over and lay on the ground. After a long time, he finally caught his breath and realized that the pain in his body had disappeared. His entire body had returned to a healthy state. It was almost inconceivable. Even the cracks and wounds on his soul had disappeared. And then, the divine mark and origin substance equipment had disappeared as well. Huaishi was dumbfounded. Wait, what happened to me? He stood up in shock and groped around his body. It was as if the divine mark and the key were forgotten in some corner. What about my injuries? My divine mark? Wait, why does my chest hurt so much? He pulled open his collar and looked at his undamaged chest. He was confused. Why do I feel like I was stabbed by a knife? It's just an illusion. It's just an illusion. Tangi's gaze seemed to drift away. She waved her hand innocently. There was a small accident. I was trying to save you. Save me? Huaishi was suspicious. Why am I being resuscitated again? Is this your doing? You're so annoying. Do you think you can push all the blame to your big sister? Tangi sighed sadly. Whenever a young person has a problem, they always try to push the blame to others. It's so sad. That's enough. Huaishi's expression twitched. What happened? Simply put, you've completed half of the ascension ceremony. Tangi explained with a smile. The first half. So you took away my divine mark and origin substance equipment? Huaishi was dumbfounded. How can you say that? Huaishi, Tangi said seriously. It didn't leave you. Instead, it stayed by your side in a different way. That sounded reasonable. But why was her tone the same as when she was trying to cheat him of his money? However, when Huaishi sensed it carefully, he found that it was just as Tangi said. Great Si Ming's divine mark and various weapons were still there, but they didn't seem to be in his body. He could feel that Great Si Ming's miracle still existed somewhere. He could use this power through his soul at any time. It was no different from before. But where did they go? This is the power of the reflection crystal, Huaishi, Tangi explained. Simply put, your smart and cute big sister had an idea. Through a ceremony, I completed the preparations for your ascension ceremony in advance. Now, Great Si Ming's divine mark and destiny have been temporarily separated by me through the reflection crystal to make room for Yun Zhongjuan's ascension ceremony. Where did it go? Huaishi was confused. Let me think, it went to quite a lot of places. Tangi casually pulled out the blade of resentment. Thanks to the many connections and karma you established with the present realm, I distributed this power to the person who shared this miracle with you. Can't you feel it? If he said he felt something, The first thing Huaishir felt was definitely darkness in front of her. What did you do behind my back? Chapter 9:13. Through the perception of his soul, Huaishir sensed the mandate of heaven that was far away in the present realm and was operating on the core wave. The current great Sea Ming had already enveloped that city. He was like a guardian deity. Soon, he also sensed the existence of his origin form equipment and the place where they were now. It was like a blessing and blessing, protecting those souls. But that was also a part of his soul. What was this? I gave it to myself. Suddenly, he was greeted with a fifth-grade outcome. This was a little too exciting. He was a little unable to react. Moreover, Huaishir turned his head and widened his eyes. He was dumbfounded. Why did you take so much? Tongi puffed out her chest without shame and solemnly retorted. Of course it's because Sister Crow is under a lot of pressure. Of course Sister Crow has to take more. All right. Do you still remember the essence of the path of Heaven's Inquisition? Tongi suddenly asked. You mean, share? Huaishir asked. That's right. You've already shared all of your power. Huaishir, have you become weaker? Tongji asked. On the contrary, you've become stronger. You're standing at a higher starting point. It's not just your one-sided giving, but also the heartfelt feedback from those who were saved. To a certain extent, this has already involved the authority of the gods. This is the true unity of many as one. Even if you have the same secret ceremony and treatment, other than you, no other ascender of the path of Heaven's Inquisition can do this. She stretched out her hand and pressed Huaishir's shoulder, telling him, You have to remember where your power comes from. You're talking about the people I'm protecting? Huaishir seemed to understand something. No, what are you thinking about? Tongi shook her head, bent down, pointed at her face seriously, and told him matter-of-factly, Of course it comes from me. So what if I take a little more? Huaishir was speechless. Moreover, he began to reflect from the bottom of his heart. There must be something wrong with him for having expectations for this woman. After repeatedly checking that there was no problem with himself and Helios, and that the broken dog of friendship had successfully returned to the present realm. After that, Huaishir went to see the other surviving alchemists and promised to send them back. Then, he realized that Izzy Hector was no longer here. Through some unknown method, they left first. She must have gone to report to her god. At the last moment, he saw the Egyptian priestess, Yima. It seems that you have gotten what you wanted. The priestess' eyes were cloudy. She looked at Huaishir. However, it's really great to see you safe and sound. Thank you for your kind words. Huaishir smiled bitterly and didn't say anything. Indeed, he had obtained a lot, but he had also lost everything he had obtained, including the friends he had just made. Was this a fulfillment of the prophecy? He didn't know. After saying goodbye, Huaishir sat alone in the bridge of Helios and looked at the empty environment around him. After a long time, he asked softly, So is Balder really dead? It should be said that he is free? Tongi replied indifferently. A long time ago, Odin foresaw the death of his son and carefully arranged everything for him. He even violated the contract he made with the world tree, transformed from the axis of the present realm, and interfered with fate with prophecy. He said that he would be resurrected after the twilight of the gods and lead humans to build a better world again. As a result, not only did the ending of the twilight of the gods change, but it also caused his son to wander in this world for so many years. Now, the prophecy has indeed come true in the best way. He gave all of his gifts to the present realm, providing a lot of correction points, and he was able to enjoy an undisturbed long sleep with his beloved. This is the best result, Huaishir. This all depends on your efforts and influence, and it is also the result of his choice. You don't have to be sad. She said, Besides, didn't he leave you a gift? At Huaishir's fingertips, a faint light appeared. That was his source substance. Pure light flowed out from his soul. This was the gift that Balder had left for Huaishir. It was a sincere blessing from the Light King. He had placed his hopes in his friend's hands without reservation or desire. So, before he reached the fourth level, he was bestowed with a divine change. Among all the qualitative changes of the source substance, it was still one of the most superior divine qualitative change, light. Regardless of the various effects brought about by this soul's blessing, all things would become more intimate with him because of this, just like how they were with Balder. As long as he didn't change his path of sublimation, then the path to the fifth level could be said to be completely unimpeded. In the silence, Huaisher couldn't help but shake his head and say no more. What are you thinking about? Tangi bent down curiously and scrutinized his face. You look very deep. I'm thinking about some trivial things. He held the little white mouse that was rolling around in his hand and sighed softly. Although parting after meeting is a common thing, I still miss him very much. Isn't it natural to miss a friend who is traveling far away? Tangi smiled and rubbed his hair, full of praise. You are indeed my best friend, Huaisher. After a while, when the closest Roman space station, Minerva, reappeared in front of them, all the survivors couldn't help but cry and cheer. Huaisher had already dug out Helios and turned it into an empty shell. Under the guidance of Fishball, through the guidance of the great guru and the secret ritual, Fishball divided the main structure and important items of Helios into 6 batches and sent them to the Twilight Village. The most important part of the divine secret ritual was inherited by Fishball. The rest of the useful items were also completely plundered by Beelzebub. Now, apart from the shells that the alchemists had built one after another, there was basically nothing left. Huaisher stood quietly in the empty hall and looked around. He felt as if a lifetime had passed. It's time to go, Huaisher, Tangi reminded him. What will happen to this place next? Huaisher asked. After losing the favor left by the gods and being cleaned by us, Helios is now only left with tens of thousands of tons of scrap iron. Although it's very valuable, it has no value to the present world at all. Tangi said the cost of fuel and disposal is also a problem. Moreover, the Stone Cauldron Society might use it to make trouble. So, it's better to pretend that we don't see it. Most likely, it will be treated as a foreign meteor and be monitored. Let's just leave it in Jupiter's orbit. That's good too. Huaisher nodded and sighed softly. Let it rest without being disturbed. He turned around and walked towards the exit. However, as he walked, he suddenly stopped in place. What's wrong? Wait a minute. He patted his head and searched his pockets and backpack. After rummaging for a long time, he finally found something in his pocket. Earlier, when I was in Publius, I found something that no one wanted. Huaisher casually handed the golden apple to Tangi. I have no use for it. Do you want it? Tangi was not in a hurry to take it. Instead, she let out a strange laugh. She looked at Huaisher carefully. The corners of her eyes raised. Oh, you're so naughty too, you idiot. Huaisher did not understand. In the past, with this thing, even if you asked the goddess for a night, she would gladly agree. Tangi moved closer and blinked her eyes, full of curiosity. Do you have any strange thoughts about me? No. Get lost. Huaisher rolled his eyes and could not be bothered with her. If you don't want it, I'll throw it away. Hee, since you're begging me to give it to you, then I'll be merciful and accept the worship of a mortal like you. Even if you regret it, it's useless. Tangi reached out and quickly took the golden apple from his hand. She tossed in her hand twice, carefully admiring it. Then, she skillfully took out her phone, gestured at various angles, and began to take selfies. Click, 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 click. The sound of flashing lights was endless. She even opened a bunch of social media apps to post. Is there something wrong with your goddess here? Huaisher rubbed his forehead with a complicated expression. By the way, what is this thing for? He asked. Does it have any magical effects? This? Tangi was puzzled. Of course it's for eating. Eating? Yes, eating. She nodded and replied. This is just an apple. Huaisher. No matter how sacred an apple is, it's just an apple. You can't think how powerful it is just because it looks golden. The apple was, of course, for eating. As she spoke, she casually wiped the apple that had been washed by Huaisher many times. When she opened her mouth, there was a crisp sound. The rich juice flowed out as she chewed, bringing a long-awaited pleasant experience. This is the taste. She narrowed her eyes happily. After many years, in this world that no longer belonged to her, she was reliving the sweetness from the past. It was as if she had returned to yesterday. Unfortunately, the era of the gods had long ended. She mourned and felt sorry for it. At the same time, she felt that such a world was not bad. "Do you want to have a bite?" Tangi turned her head and looked at the contractor beside her. She handed it over. "It tastes very good." Huaishur stared at the golden apple in front of him and hesitated for a long time. He nodded with difficulty. "Okay. Helios Incident 3rd Issue Report. Time of appearance, 1:32 in the morning. Destruction Elemental Prototype number 009 Helios has been confirmed to be harmless. The god of light, Balder, has fallen. Apophis has once again gone into hiding. The destruction elemental prototype has not been formed. According to the investigation, the deaths of Grandmaster Garland and Publius have been confirmed. The original chief of Helios, Hades, has gone missing. The above details have been investigated and restored from the survivors, and the relevant report has been submitted by second-class military officer Huaishur of the Command Bureau. Please see the attachment. It is judged that the Helios engine has been destroyed and is no longer worth maintaining. It is recommended that the standard treatment plan be carried out for 6 standard periods of observation before abandoning it. The accident investigation team is about to wrap up and await further instructions. Reply from the Central Decision Room of the Command Bureau. The suggestion has been accepted. Subsequent matters will be transferred to the overhead floor. The observation mission has been conveyed to Probe Team 87. The investigation team has been withdrawn. At the same time, on the moon, the acceleration rings of countless heavy mass cannons slowly dimmed. Under the pull of gravity, the massive moon returned to its original position. It took 7 standard days. The subsequent impact on the reality, including the tidal disorder and the abnormal degree of gravity, will be taken over by the continuation department. The specific hidden dangers were eliminated 2 months later, including economic losses and astronomical anomalies. The chain reactions caused by this were countless, but under the interference of the Astronomy Society, they were quietly hidden in the darkness. Just like that, the Helios incident came to an end. Apart from the periodic missions of the 6 observation stations and the permanent observation of Probe Harper, no one else cared about it. The empty space once again regained its silence. Outside the reality, in the void ocean on the surface of hell, in the dark universe, Jupiter was still operating silently. The silent remains of Helios floated quietly above the eternal storm. It was like a glimmer in the eyes of the devil. In the deepest part of it, in the remote corner where the warm light once burned, silence was restored. The messy books were reorganized and the shabby furniture was repaired. Whether it was water bottles, empty boxes, old photos, or wheelbarrows, the items that were once regarded as treasures were now solemnly placed among them. On an old sofa, a skeleton bathed in dust peacefully and slept silently. A bouquet of pure white iris flowers accompanied him. Forever. Chapter 9:14. Time of appearance, November 27th, 2112, 16:06 p.m. Location, Frozen Earth Warren, the secret border of the Directorate of Defense. Border Blockade Administration Branch Beta 01. In the eternal storm, pale snow powder blue toward them. In the distance, only a huge building faintly appeared. The pitch-black building propped up a magnificent outline, creating a paradise as warm as spring in the eternal low temperature and severe cold. Outside the paradise, there was only the terrifyingly low temperature that was like the polar regions and the never-ending wind and snow. B4 is in position. There's a problem with A1. It can be solved. 5 minutes. B6 is in position. At this moment, in the pale snowfield outside the Directorate of Defense, dancing spots appeared one after another, skillfully bypassing all the cameras and detection devices. Under the seal of white cloaks and heat, they crawled in the snow, hiding in the darkness that no one noticed. Following the command from afar, they slowly approached the building in the center. At the back, in the temporary tent under the snow cave, the commander blew on his fingers, picked up the boiling kettle, and poured it into a cup. The conditions are limited. I hope Secretary AI doesn't mind. At least we can stay in the tent. We don't have to lie in the snow. We just need a mouthful of hot water. AI Ching held the teacup, white steam rising from her nose and mouth. It's not like we're going camping. There's no need to be so particular. Her entire body was wrapped in thick winter clothes. Her exposed face and 10 fingers were frozen white. Only her lips were still a little red. The former commander of the Dark Army sighed, looking at the building that was slowly enlarging on the surveillance screen. He couldn't help but curse. Those F***ers can still use air conditioning. I'm so envious. It's normal. AI Ching took a sip of the hot water that was rapidly losing temperature. The treatment of the blockade administration has always been the best among the same level. I know this too well. At the mention of this, the commander was immediately enraptured. I originally planned to work in the blockade administration for 2 years after retiring. I didn't have to do anything all day long, far away from the rain of bullets, go to work, make a cup of tea, and fight a dozen games. I could fight for a day, but in the end, after staying for a while, I still couldn't stand it. I found an opportunity to run back. AI Ching looked up at the old man in front of the screen. Are you feeling lonely? The commander smiled bitterly and shook his head. No, it's not to that extent, but it's too lonely. He sighed and took out his cigarette case to ask AI Ching for permission. When he saw AI Ching wave her hand, indicating that she didn't mind, he pulled out a stick with trembling hands and placed it in front of the oil stove. He took a deep breath before he could catch his breath and let out a sigh. I wanted to live a peaceful life, but there was nothing there other than peace. It's no different from a prison. Some people go in when they're in their 20s and die there when they're in their 90s, never leaving for the rest of their lives. The commander sighed helplessly. If nothing goes wrong, their lives will be unknown. If something goes wrong, their lives will become meaningless. It's like hell. As a subordinate organization of the elevated floor and a confidential unit of the former Dark Army, the blockade administration's duty was to watch over or deal with some major threats to reduce the pressure on the Continuation Academy. Therefore, from the first day of your employment, you had already disappeared from the present world. There was no such thing as retirement or resignation. Even if their working years were up, they would only be transferred to other confidential units. After they died, there would only be a tombstone. Some people were not even allowed to write their names on it. Even if the compensation was generous, internal marriage was allowed, and there were huge subsidies for the family, there were still very few people who responded. It's only right that the treatment is better. The commander held the cigarette that was about to go out and said slowly, "If the treatment is not good, I'm afraid I won't be able to continue working." As he said this, he was not in a good mood. It was better to say that it was terrible. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said so much to the others in the short gap before the mission began. After all, once the Dark Army was mobilized, it meant that the situation inside the blockade administration had deteriorated to the limit and needed to face a purge. Sorry, I'm being long-winded. He shrugged and smiled. It's too unprofessional. It has nothing to do with professionalism. AI Ching didn't comfort him, nor did she say anything. For the killing machines of the Dark Army, such sympathy and pity were too ridiculous. She just calmly changed the topic. What's sealed in Beta 01? The commander began to brief the representative from the decision-making room. Before this, it was a dangerous item discovered by the Stoneware Society and reported to the Astronomical Association. It was the work of the Pied Piper. It looks like a note torn from a notepad, but reading the contents and trying to investigate are taboo matters. Which part went wrong? AI Ching asked. It's probably the innermost sealing facility. When it was handed over to the blockade administration, Grandmaster Garland personally imposed a secret seal on it. According to speculation, it's possible that the Grandmaster's death caused the secret seal to become unstable. Even the middle and outer sealing facilities were leaked. The commander sighed. When the overhead floor received the news and began to investigate one by one, there was no response from Beta 01. A hoarse voice came from the walkie-talkie. C6 is close to the maintenance well. The journey is smooth. The internal signal has been obtained. Do you want to connect? Connect it. Thus, in an instant, a hellish scene appeared on the screen. Everything that could be seen was a mess of flesh and blood. Countless scarlet colors spread on the walls, pulsing like a pulse. The originally warm paradise had turned into a strange world that made one's scalp tingle. Countless strange symbols squirmed on the walls. The shadows ignored the laws of physics and spread under the light. However, strange bubbles kept appearing in the light. Squirming objects that were almost indistinguishable from human silhouettes danced under the camera and staggered in what used to be the office. The deep transformation has ended. It has formed a cycle of hell. The commander was silent for a moment because everything was irreparable. He picked up the walkie-talkie and ordered, "Start setting up this spring of purification." "Wait a minute," AI Ching suddenly said. "Cut back the camera at that point just now." The scene she was pointing at was the inner garden. Now, the vicious flowers had grown the teeth of beasts and had begun to gnaw. In the corner of the garden, two bloody mutants leaned against the wall. There was a blurry voice, snoring. "So annoying. Change. Is there any way? Bear with it. Aren't you also?" In the silence, the sharp noise gradually came to an end. The two mutants turned around and left. The tent was dead silent. "It seems that they still have some rationality left," AI Ching said. "No, it's worse than that." The commander rubbed the bridge of his nose and laughed mockingly. "They don't even know that they've been transformed. Perhaps, in their eyes, everything is normal. They had already fallen into hell with their own world. At least there's a possibility of communication, right?" AI Ching pondered for a moment and suddenly said, "Before I came, I prepared a secret code and all the authority commands. Perhaps we can still try. The possibility is not high." The commander shook his head. "Forgive me for being blunt, but the transformation is already irreversible. The attack from a spring of purification may cause even worse consequences. This is a consideration for the sealing of the item." AI Ching said, "We have to ensure that the sealing item is absolutely stable, but as long as there's a possibility, we have to try." The commander pondered for a moment and said directly, "This is your mission, Secretary AI. If you want to do it, we won't stop you. But you have to understand that we also have a mission. If you fail, we won't rescue you. Yes, when the time comes, we'll just blow the target to ashes together with me." AI Ching nodded in agreement. She picked up the briefcase beside her and stood up with the help of her cane. Before she said goodbye, she turned back to thank the commander one last time. "Thank you for your support, Secretary AI." The commander couldn't help but stop her and remind her seriously, "They can't be saved. What you're doing is meaningless." "I know." AI Ching calmly looked back. "Just think of it as me trying to earn more points during the promotion inspection. Just because of this?" The commander was suspicious. "What else?" AI Ching was puzzled. "Other than this, is there any noble reason for the political creatures of the general administration?" The commander shook his head, smiled, and slowly got up. "Then, let me carry out the duty of rescue. When necessary, I will protect your safety." "No need." AI Ching raised her cane. At that moment, outside the narrow tent, in the world of ice and snow, a ferocious silhouette suddenly appeared. It was fleeting, but it was chilling. It was as if there was an invisible monster hiding in her shadow. It was ferocious. The autonomous robot, Cerberus from the technical department? The commander was speechless. "I've never seen a model before." "Is it the latest model?" "No, the normal version. It's just a troublesome guy living in it." AI Ching smiled slightly and disappeared into the snow under the protection of the beast. Only a line of burn marks on the ground did not disappear for a long time. 15 minutes later, in front of the huge fortress building, after going through the iris verification and the key verification of the overhead floor, the heavy door slowly opened in front of her, and a warm wind with a foul smell blew in her face. Then, from behind the door, a bloody object slowly wriggled, like the corpse of a decapitated giant. There were several wriggling tentacles on the swollen body, making vague sounds. "Welcome, welcome. I am the security director, Pajero," the strange mutant asked. "Why are people from the general administration here?" "Spot inspection." AI Ching ignored the wriggling tentacles in front of her and showed the certificate in her hand. "I am here on behalf of the decision-making room to inspect the sealed items." "Wait a minute. Let me see. Where is it? Where is it?" The wriggling body seemed to be searching for something. Finally, in the tattered pocket, it found a verification device that had been parasitized by tentacles and swept it over AI Ching's certificate. Behind the verification device, the mouth suddenly let out a sharp hiss. Perhaps that was the beep of a successful verification. AI Ching waited calmly until a tentacle stopped in front of her, suspended in the air, and dripped sticky, waiting. The swollen person opened his mouth and said hoarsely, "Welcome, your arrival." AI Ching reached out to hold it, shook it slightly, and let go. The thing that used to belong to the security director turned around and wriggled in front to lead the way. "Lunchtime is up first." After checking the sealed items, AI Ching said. It's okay." The security director replied vaguely and led her through the door and corridor into the hall where countless huge rotten organs were hanging. They went all the way down. In the shadows of those mutants, countless sticky bubbles rose, as if something amorphous was crawling in them. But when AI Ching's shadow swept past, fleeting flames appeared faintly, and faint tragic cries came from the void. Under her feet, an angry burning bull cast a ferocious outline. The wriggling security director stopped for a moment. "What sounds strange, really strange, since a few days ago. It's been strange. There's nothing strange about it." AI Ching calmly followed behind, crossed the floor covered with mold and eyeballs, and told him, "Everything is normal. Normal, normal." Soon, some of the blankness dissipated in the gradually chaotic mind after the aberration, leaving only the last remnant of responsibility. First verification, second verification, and third verification. The key from the overhead floor smoothly entered the underground facility, passed through the demonic realm that had long been changed beyond recognition, and went all the way to the core. In the end, the security director stopped outside the slowly rising gate. "I will wait here," it said vaguely. "My duties are limited. Please forgive me, okay?" AI Ching raised her hand, adjusted the flat glasses in front of her eyes, walked past the swollen thing beside her, and walked into the darkness that even the light couldn't illuminate. Endless phantoms emerged from the darkness with an inaudible call. Even the glasses from the technical department couldn't block the illusions, which gradually seeped into the soul and invaded the brain. But AI Ching counted her steps silently, compared with the map in her memory, and moved forward step by step. She passed Huaishi's smile, her own corpse, and countless more illusions, and brushed past her mother. The high temperature caused by the overloaded glasses maintained her last bit of rationality. She finally saw the outline after the illusion. It was a huge cage that was slowly beating like a heart. Every tentacle was waving angrily, trying to reach into her spinal cord and pull her soul out. But it couldn't stop her from moving forward. More protection emerged from her body and soul, and it was difficult to break and erode in a short period of time. It could only allow her to open her vital parts step by step according to the operating rules. It was like an operation, coldly peeling off the core from it. Finally, the ancient copper box was accurately placed into the inside of the briefcase. When the briefcase was closed, 3 layers of buckles inscribed with complicated matrices closed. The inside and outside were isolated again. In a trance, there seemed to be a hissing sound. But when she listened carefully, she couldn't hear it anymore. Until now, AI Ching was still unmoved. She just lowered her head and stared at her watch, counting the time silently. It wasn't until 5 minutes later, when she confirmed that she was conscious again through the probe and test paper, that she finally let out a long breath, sweating. She didn't even have the strength to lift the briefcase. The containment of the sealed item has been completed. Almost at the edge of the countdown to the scheduled detonation, a message was sent to the outside. Roger, please prepare to withdraw. The reply from the commander was still concise. The situation is a bit wrong. You need to be careful. When the support of the lie was lost, all the pain hidden under the illusion would collapse. But before the collapse, would she have enough time to withdraw? The commander picked up the walkie-talkie and ordered in a low voice, B3, get ready to break in and rescue. In the distance, in the blizzard, the fortress was still silent. It was so quiet. Chapter 9:15. After catching her breath for a moment, AI Ching picked up the briefcase, passed through the darkness of mutation again, and returned to the distorted world outside the door. Even though the pollutants had been sealed again, everything that had been deeply mutated could not be restored. Instead, it began to spread out more and more uncontrollably. She could only do her best to ensure the completion of the mission. That was all. But for some reason, her footsteps paused, and she stopped beside the head of security. Miss AI's examination. Is the examination over? Pajero wriggled and asked vaguely in his swollen body. Our work is very strict, very strict. There are no mistakes, right? Well, yes, there are no mistakes. AI Ching paused for a moment and nodded. This is all thanks to everyone's dedication. But why? I feel Pajero's voice became sharp, and it was impossible to tell whether it was a groan or a wail. I feel not so good. Is there a problem? Strange. What's strange? In the silence, AI Ching lowered her eyes and sighed silently. Mr. Pajero, on behalf of the decision-making room, I thank you for the sacrifice you have made for the safety of the present realm. She looked at the terminal in her hand and suddenly said, If I give you a purification order, will you comply? A scream-like prompt sounded from the terminal in Pajero's hand. An order representing the highest authority emerged from the top. It illuminated his numb face. In his obscure and chaotic thoughts, a trace of realization finally emerged, bringing with it a painful realization. So it's like this, he whispered softly. Pollution spread. AI Ching did not speak and waited quietly until he lowered his head deeply. Please follow me. Follow me. Once again, he turned around and wriggled forward. When the first trace of confusion was answered, the world in front of him became exceptionally erratic. The artificial sun's sunlight, the green lawn, the colleagues coming and going, and the way they talked and laughed. But everything was so normal, so what was wrong? He could not understand. He was just in pain, scared and sad. He stared blankly at all of this, crying silently. After a long time, he turned around and opened the office door. He opened the safe. He picked up the red phone. Notice to all members of Beta 01. Emergency situation. I repeat, emergency situation. He paused for a moment, and his swollen body gradually bent down. Please, all members, gather at the shelter. After doing all this, he seemed to have lost all his strength. He leaned on his chair and stared blankly at AI Ching behind the table. The red light of the alarm illuminated her face. There must be a mistake somewhere. He defended himself weakly, raising his tentacles to cover his face. As if he was crying, he lamented vaguely. We've been working here for 50 years. There's clearly no problem. AI Ching didn't say anything until the sound of the alarm was cut off from the window. In the surveillance footage, all the members followed the guidance and entered the door of the underground shelter. Do I have to do this? Have to? Pajero muttered to himself. AI Ching remained silent. She just looked at him quietly. When the red button was pressed, flames and high temperature gushed out from the gap of the shelter. Screams and questions were heard from the communication channel. Finally, there was no more sound. Purification command complete. Pajero's tentacles spasmed. He picked up a pistol, raised his head with difficulty, and begged, Now, there's only one left. Thank you for your cooperation. AI Ching nodded, took the pistol, and aimed it at his face. Finally, she asked, "Is there anything else you want to say? Why did you tell me?" Probably because of sympathy. AI Ching thought for a moment and told him solemnly, "It's sympathy between the weak. I'm sorry, I can't help you, and I don't have the ability to free you. At best, I can only be like a dabbler and let you make your own choice." She said, "This is the only thing I can do for you." "No, there's no choice." Pajero twitched, wept, and cried hoarsely. "Increase the pain, perhaps." AI Ching replied, "But the death of reason is different from the fall of ignorance. Even if it's just showing resistance, you have to fight back against the enemy. If you give in, then your previous persistence will be worthless. Let me testify, Mr. Pajero, that you have never degenerated. Until the end, you are members of the Astronomy Society who are proud of you." In the long silence, Pajero's turbid eyes lit up. "Will there be redemption?" "Maybe not." AI Ching lowered her eyes and said goodbye softly. "If there's a day, let's meet again in hell." She pulled the trigger. There was no more hesitation. With a low sound, a hole appeared on Pajero's head. Flames spread and enveloped the still, twitching, aberrant shell, quickly bringing about destruction. At the last moment, Pajero seemed to show a relieved smile. His lips opened and closed as if he wanted to say something. Soon, the smile turned into ashes as the flames extinguished. Together with a final farewell, they were buried together in the empty seat. In the silence, AI Ching picked up the briefcase and turned to leave. The moment she walked out of the door, a purifying light descended from the sky and engulfed the fortress behind her. In the blink of an eye, everything disappeared without a trace. Mission complete. AI Ching raised the briefcase in her hand and stood in place. She gave one last order into the communication channel. "I need an origin anticoagulant, anesthesia, and standard biological isolation." A soft bang came from the distance. She closed her eyes. 5 minutes later, a staff member wearing a heavy chemical protective suit carefully placed her sleeping body into the isolation chamber, closed the door, and waved to the sky. The helicopter in the clouds rose. In the end, only the wind and snow were left. It gradually fell on the scorched earth, covering everything that had once been there. "Well done." When AI Ching opened her eyes on the bed in the isolation chamber, she heard the praise from the walkie-talkie. "Our recorder extracted the incident records and reviewed it. You did better than anyone expected. I was just fulfilling my duty. There's nothing to brag about." AI Ching raised her hand and saw the indwelling needle on her arm. "How long have I been asleep?" "Standard isolation observation and testing. A week. Some signs of abyss erosion were found in the middle of the week. One minor surgery, another minor surgery." The person on the walkie-talkie said, "Now, you can come out." AI Ching slowly got up and checked the hospital gown on her body. Soon, she saw the alchemy array on her arm that she had never noticed before. She frowned but didn't say anything. However, the moment she pushed the door open, her eyes were in a daze. She instantly went from the hospital to an unfamiliar place. No, she had been here before. The head of the Central Decision-Making Room of the Directorate of Defense, Secretary General Yeager's office. "Sorry, someone was in a hurry to see you, so I used the Rainbow Bridge at the last minute." Behind the desk, Yeager signed the last transfer order in his hand and closed the document. He looked up and said, "You have been chosen, Madam AI. Just as I predicted back then, you have the ability to maintain this world." "Why didn't I know I had such a thing?" AI Ching shook her head self-deprecatingly. "Just like you said, rationality. Only with enough rationality can one face complicated situations. Of course, it would be better if you add a little outstanding intuition." Yeager got up and opened the door behind him that hadn't been opened for a long time. He waved at her. "Please follow me. You say it as if I have the right to refuse. Will you refuse?" Yeager turned around and asked, "Didn't you work hard for this moment?" AI Ching didn't answer. She just followed him into the empty hall behind the door. The Astronomical Society, no, the world, the core of true power. So, the Pioneer Society really exists? She looked around and looked at the empty wall. It's not the predecessor of the Astronomical Society in history, but the one who presides over the Astronomical Society. It really exists, right? Jaeger shook his head and smiled. Usually, people who come here are more reserved. I prefer to be more straightforward, AI Ching said. Isn't this more proof of my talent? It's just as you said. Jaeger nodded and confirmed her words. The Pioneer Society really exists. Following his words, the hall began to sink. They arrived in a quiet darkness and slowly descended, until a weak light surrounded them. Under the protection of the complex machinery, the huge stone tablet stood quietly. Hundreds of huge stone coffins stood around it, connected by countless cables. In the end, they sank into the base under the stone tablet, causing a blurry face to appear on the stone tablet. It was like a candle in the wind, about to disappear at any time. In a long sleep, his or her eyelids trembled slightly, as if they would wake up at any time. After looking at it for a long time, the blurry face seemed to undergo some strange changes. It gradually became like a mother, like herself. What is that? AI Ching couldn't help but take a step back and frown. This is the main body of the Pioneer Society. AI Ching, everything you've been secretly investigating in the past few months is not some secret organization, nor is it some terrifying inhuman group. Jaeger said softly, the Pioneer Society is humans themselves. In the silence, AI Ching looked around in shock. Looking at those stone coffins, she asked in confusion, those things, who are they? They're people who sacrificed everything for the present realm. Jaeger told her respectfully. Among the people there were prophets who were born with knowledge and received the favor of the heavens. There were also seekers who were dull and slow-witted, but one day gained enlightenment. There were also sincere people who faced their lives faithfully until the very last moment. Starting from the era of the Pioneer Society and continuing through the generations, the presidents, talents, heroes, and great people who made indescribable contributions would all be given a choice when facing death. Should I die peacefully, or should I sacrifice everything I have for the present world? All those who chose the latter would lie in it. Their bodies would be frozen, and their souls would be made into templates and specimens, becoming the crucial cornerstone. In this way, through the computing device of the Silver Ocean, the Silent One's stone tablet, the chaotic souls of all humans could be temporarily personified. At the critical moment, they would make a choice and control the future of this world. At least, they would let humans choose the final outcome for themselves. Over the past few hundred years, the Pioneer Society has awakened a total of 16 times. The last time it awakened was when the Utopia fell. Throughout history, it has issued hundreds of prophecies and warnings to us through dreamspeak. It has never failed to avert the crisis of the present realm's collapse. Jaeger reached out to touch the base of the stone tablet and announced to the successor beside him, "You have been chosen, AI Ching. From today onwards, you will exist as a member of the Pioneer Society and run for the will of humans. Today, I will entrust this power to you." He said, "I hope you can fulfill your mission." After a long silence, AI Ching nodded solemnly. However, Jaeger smiled and patted her on the shoulder. "Relax. There are more than 400 people like you in the world. If you feel that the pressure is too great, just treat it as an ordinary part-time job." Can there really be people who can treat it as an ordinary part-time job? Of course there are, but I hope you won't be that kind of problematic child. It's better to be serious at critical moments. Jaeger rubbed the space between his eyebrows. In short, this is just a process. Now, you are qualified to come into contact with the core secrets of the Astronomy Society. Congratulations. I only hope that you can still maintain your rationality in the end. To be honest, when I first saw it, I also couldn't accept it. As he spoke, he moved aside. The path to the stone tablet was displayed in front of her. He gestured with his hand. He patiently waited for her response and did not rush her. After hesitating for a long time, AI Ching walked up step by step. She stood under the stone tablet and looked up. When she focused and observed carefully, the blurry face could no longer be seen. It was replaced by lines of prophecies from yesterday. About the list of the 24 elements of destruction, AI Ching subconsciously took a deep breath. She looked at the top. Element of destruction, Rancher. Element of destruction, Pied Piper. Element of destruction, Gaia. Element of destruction, Buishuan. Element of destruction, Man in Gray. The list was not coherent. The fragments that had been fulfilled lit up with warning lights. The fragments that were destroyed had cracks, and those that had not appeared were hidden in the chaos of nothingness and could not be seen clearly. For example, Element of Destruction Apophis, an existence that symbolized a major threat to the present realm from outer space, was dim and almost extinguished. However, it could not be completely eliminated. It should be said that as long as the concept of the universe existed for the present realm, such hidden dangers would not be cut off. Soon, AI Ching jumped over the chaotic fog in the middle and looked at the bottom of the stone tablet. Her heart suddenly contracted. Even if she had guessed it, she still held her breath. She subconsciously clenched her fingers. That line of dim handwriting, the last prophecy made by the previous president, was the biggest hidden danger that could destroy the world. This was the core secret of the Astronomy Society and the most targeted target. At the same time, it was also an enemy that could not be defeated even if they prepared for years and were vigilant day and night. The last of the 24 elements of destruction was also the first existence. Element of destruction, Astronomy Society. Chapter 916. Name: Abba, Abba, Abba. Age: Abba, Abba, Abba. Gender: Abba, Abba, Abba. 10 minutes later, Huaisher sat on the ground with his legs crossed. He looked at the strange object in front of him that had to be covered with several layers of mosaic and finally gave up asking questions. It seemed that he wouldn't be able to get anything out of it. He looked up at the sky and sighed. He couldn't help but scratch his head. So what the F***CK did I refine? Abba, Abba, Abba. The stupid thing drooled and disappeared without a trace as the source substance was cut off. An hour ago, at 1 o'clock in the morning, on the south side of the Domwood district, on the beach, at the bottom of the tidal power station, in a huge underground space. In the huge, unfinished space, countless cables were exposed crudely, and in the center were several empty areas the size of football fields, as well as a straight passage that extended into the darkness. Even if a famous power group from the border was introduced to provide power, this method was still not cost-effective for the entire city, except for emergencies at critical moments and to meet the high-intensity power needs of small-scale, important institutions. Therefore, under the huge demand, the Domwood Group cooperated with the Kansan Group to introduce the Ingzhou power grid. However, in order to avoid being controlled by others, the Domwood Group still cooperated with the Ivory Towers Construction Group to build several power stations to provide for emergency needs. Now, the power of key departments and experimental institutions could be self-sufficient. Half a month after Huaisher returned from Helios, he finally came to this power station that was not fully completed. But the work was not to inspect, but to test the limits of his ability. The scholars from the Ivory Tower had already included this place under a temporary observation framework and were nervously adjusting the instruments in the distance. They were waiting for the data to be displayed. When the roaring sound around finally stopped, Huaisher was still slowly moving his body in circles. The hot air exhaled from his mouth and nose, leaving a long trail under the illumination of the searchlight. What was even more shocking was the mountain of bullet casings under his feet and the dozens of broken machine guns around him. After the melted bodies of the guns, the heavy machine guns no longer had any reaction. They were emitting electric sparks. The ammunition reserves that were enough for a small war had dried up like Huaisher's wallet. It was empty. Everyone was still immersed in the scene just now, and no one spoke. Dozens of crisscrossing bullets locked onto Huaisher on the screen. The extremely fast bullets formed a straight iron line on the screen, enveloping the entire underground space. Even with the rapid rotation of 16 huge ventilating fans, It was impossible to remove the pungent smell of gunpowder in a short period of time. Such terrifying firepower had completely shattered the temporary defensive fortifications in the field. However, he simply could not catch up to Huaishi's heels. I miscalculated. The scholar who checked the data could not help but shake his head. What was tested was not speed at all, but reaction ability. As early as the moment the machine gun aimed, it was already detected. This kind of value does not have any reference value at all. After all, it was not even used in the overload state. Do I need to add more weight? Under the double artificial gravity, Huaishi turned around and asked, I can still withstand it. No need, there's no need for that. At present, it seems that the limit of sprinting under normal conditions has exceeded 900 kilometers per hour. With your endurance, you should be able to maintain it for more than half an hour, right? More or less. According to the program's estimation, the limit value under the overload state should be able to reach 7,000 kilometers per hour. Racing with missiles. This is already in the category of level 4, and it has to be after origin materialization. If you want to reach this level purely with the body, only a top sublimator with speed specialization can do it. The scholar turned a page and continued, the nerve reaction time is infinitely close to 0. There is no difference after homogenization. Let's enter the strength test segment. Wasn't this segment tested before? Huaishi asked, puzzled. The previous train of thought was completely wrong. For sublimators who have mastered the supreme, you speak of, the specific value is meaningless. Moreover, we can't move the machine that you can't destroy from the academy in such a short time. Therefore, we intend to make the results more intuitive. The scholar in the observation room said, it's not just the amount of power, but also the efficiency and endurance of a utilization. Following his words, the nimble installers finally finished their work. In front of Huaishi was a huge steel pedestal, and a heavy handle had been welded to it. Huaishi reached out and tried to pull it twice, but found that it did not budge at all. What is this? Huaishi asked. A handle specially prepared for you, Your Excellency. The scholar pushed his glasses and said cheerfully, the entire pedestal is connected to the equipment of the power station. In theory, your power can be distributed to every corner of the power station. However, please do not use brute force. After all, although the material of the connecting rod is alloy and has good power transmission efficiency, its hardness and toughness are far lower than ordinary special steel. Please be careful not to break it. After getting used to the scholar's bad taste, Huaishi nodded in realization. So, you want to see a fine job, right? Exactly. In the observation room, the scholar skillfully opened the bets and received the money while he answered, Next, please let us see your power and utilization efficiency. All right. Huaishi sighed and reached out, clenching the handle in front of him. Before we start, can you help me bet $100? Bet that I can succeed. The scholar's hands paused for a moment, not expecting that. He could actually see the scene in the observation room through more than 6 layers of concrete walls. However, now, Huaishi was not in the mood to pay attention to those trivial things. The sensing range of the permanent Supreme Symphony was rapidly shrinking. Then, along the pedestal under the handle, it began to expand in all directions along the countless complicated steel matrices and mechanical structures. In the blink of an eye, from top to bottom, the entire power station was shrouded in the Supreme. Huaishi closed his eyes and followed the slight sound of the handle. The entire structure of the power station had appeared in his mind, from the pedestal under his feet to the end of the countless mechanical connections. Everything was detailed. Then, the roar exploded again. The high-pitched sound almost tore everyone's eardrums. Even if there was a distance between them and the underground space, the observers at the side of the field could not help but retreat. Even with the thick, soundproof earmuffs, the sharp sounds still pierced into the brain. No, that was not the observation of the eardrums. It was the vibration from the soles of the feet that caused the cruel sound to drill into the flesh and echoed in the bones, coldly trampling on every inch of the skin. A hurricane swept across, blowing in the face. Countless dust particles flew into the air. The ground rippled like water. It was not the trembling of the earth, but the deflection of the light caused by the airflow. After a long period of brewing, the power of Supreme's symphony had spread to every corner of the entire power station. At this moment, following Huaishi's movements, an indescribable amount of power flowed through his hands and converged on a handle. A rhythmic roar burst forth. It was as if the whole world was breathing with him. In the field, Huaishi's sweat turned into steam and rose. After entering the state of overdrive, his body was twitching wildly, unable to bear the terrifying pressure. The handle in his hand had also been burned red. The excessive power was converted into heat, spreading in all directions along the steel pillar that was as thick as a wrist. In an instant, everything was silent, as if being thrown into a recording room. Even the sound of breathing became so ear-piercing. The sound of heartbeat and pulse reverberated in the ears, rapidly magnifying. Because all the sound from the outside world had disappeared. It was tightly held by the palm, shrinking between the 5 fingers. In the form of vibration, burst forth. It was transmitted downwards, causing the earth to tremble. In the observation room, the scholars looked at each other in shock. Suddenly, a phone rang. The person who picked up the phone gradually widened his eyes and could not help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Unbelievable. In that moment, just now, the entire tidal power station stopped operating. The operation of hundreds of hydro units came to an abrupt halt. Even the surge of the tide could not move the hundreds of thousands of fan blades. It was as if an invisible hand had clamped them tightly, not allowing them to move at all. Even the concrete could not block out the ear-piercing sound. It was so dull that it resounded in everyone's heart. It formed an absurd picture in their minds. In that moment, in the core of the power station, all the hydro units began to operate again. Sparks flew, and the ear-piercing sound of friction continued to be heard. But this time, it was not like before operating with the tide. It was moving against the tide, under the control of a single palm. This enormous force, with this insignificant lever as the endpoint, displayed an astonishing deviation and reversal. Majestic power burst forth from the hydro wheels, causing all the mechanical structures to transmit the mighty force and will from the center. Countless fan blades slowly moved in the opposite direction, stirring up the tide and setting off undercurrents under the undulating surface of the sea. Countless waves burst forth. When Huaishe raised his eyes lit up with a blazing radiance. It was as if the enormous power station had been bestowed with a consciousness. Following his orders, it roared loudly, causing the loud noise to spread out, turning into a thunderous sound that resounded through the entire Dambwa night sky. What is this? On the dam, the patrolling security guards turned their heads, dumbfounded. Under the illumination of the flashlight, they saw countless rising bubbles and surging ocean currents. The entire ocean seemed to be boiling. The heavy currents rolled and collided with each other, like metal rubbing against metal, making ear-piercing sounds one after another. When Huaishi's 5 fingers moved on the handle, it was as if he was waving an invisible baton across countless obstacles. The sound of the waves rose and fell, turning into a mighty melody. In the observation room, the scholar who was holding the phone with trembling hands pressed the button to put it on speaker. Thus, the faint and distant sound of the waves poured into everyone's ears. Symphony No. 9, from the New Continent. The scholar in front of the screen ignored the countless numbers flowing in front of his eyes. He looked back and murmured in disbelief. This is the 4th movement. At this moment, the surging tide turned into the rapid melody of a violin. The crashing of the waves became the beat of a drum. Even the roar of the hydro wheels became the solemn sound of a horn. All the restless souls were subdued, and all the listeners bowed their heads. Compared to this solemn melody, everything else was as insignificant as dust. That impassioned melody came suddenly and quickly, and then it came to an abrupt end. It quickly blurred and collapsed into a high-pitched hiss, then completely cut off. Everything was silent. Only the distant sound of the turbulent waves could be heard. For a long, long time, everyone was still frozen in place, unable to wake up from the residual sound of the waves. It was not enough. Why did it stop so abruptly? In the underground space, Huaisher sighed silently and let go of his hand. Seems like I'm still not proficient enough, he shrugged regretfully. This round, it's my loss. In front of him, the steel rod had been completely melted by the conversion of heat, leaving only the deformed handle with clear fingerprints. It fell to the ground with a clang. Huaisher's fingertips dripped with blood. 16 seconds. He had usurped the operation of the power station, controlled the huge power, and even reversed the tides. This was the symphony that Huaisher had played with all his might. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.